See? All right. An absolute good morning to you, our colleagues. We hope that you've had a very well-rested night and are excited to join us for another thrilling day of our sessions. I just would love us to come into the space and ululate, you know. And I was thinking this is one of the things we're also going to do every time that when you come together is ululate and unite in the spirit of Ubuntu. So if we can all ululate with me. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Sabulela, thank you so much. Rion.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're a bit sparser, but we know our colleagues will join us as we go along. Having people so early out here for 2 days in a row, I think, is sometimes a bit challenging. But thank you for those who are here with us, who are ready to engage in this second day of discussion, discourse, coming up with solutions for some of these challenges we identified yesterday. I think to give us a recap of yesterday and to really, sum up everything, package it nicely and put us on course for today, I want to invite our colleague Arthur Rungemensa to give us a recap of yesterday, and then we'll continue the program. Arthur? Just a round of applause.
Thank you. I think it's always good to start a day with a little bit of a reflection. I think as we tried yesterday, and you already mentioned Ubuntu, and I think I should also remind you about what the G20 presidency is about. It's about solidarity, equality, sustainability. And I think yesterday was the day where we tried to build trust. And I think I say that we have achieved it. And I can show you why I think we have achieved it, because I still have my little stone somebody gave to me in my pocket. And I hope all of you will have the stone somewhere in your pocket. I'm not going to do a quick check on that. Let me just focus on 3 questions, 3 takeaways for me. I think yesterday clearly showed that there is reasons for hope. But then there's also challenges. And then the last thing I want to, of course, talk about is what does it mean for philanthropy? Because that's where I'm coming from today with my today's hat on. Those of you who don't know me, I've been working for 30 years in the civil service in Brussels in the European Commission, and 20 years of that I spent on climate change, trying to form international climate policies. So I was in Paris when we sealed the Paris Agreement. I was dealing with the European climate policy. And before that, I also spent and lived for 8 years in Africa, because I'm an agriculture economist, half of that in West Africa and the other half in Zimbabwe, at the time when I could see the first elections in South Africa. So it's so nice to be back. And I think if you take that long-term view, there's really a lot of reasons for hope. Why do I think so? Because yesterday was very clear from many of the interventions of the people who are working on the ground that we know how to do it. If it is done in the right and if it's done in a just way. I think there were great cases presented from all over Africa that when we put development at the center and we empower people to implement, if we communicate to them, with them, in a way that they understand, and if we co-create, then I think that's a good way forward. We also heard, I think, that don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. I heard that we really need to work alongside the people on the ground in order to move forward together. And even, I think, we know how to work with climate finance, something that is always coming as a sour point, because there's just not too much of that. But yesterday, I think it was very clear that we can be very smart and clever on how to use it. So I think, all in all, we practically know how to do this and how to move forward. And what it also tells me is that democracy works, something that is being challenged today. The second thing I got from the room yesterday is that we agree on what are the big challenges. Because one of the challenges is that while we seemingly know how to move forward, we don't get to scale, and we are not getting to the right speed. So that is something we really need to work on. And I think from that it's clear that there's many people out there who really feel being left behind, that they can't be part of the transition. We are not acknowledging that too much, and particularly if you look at governments and politicians. What people see is that there are still many plans that are made on the basis of the old model of development. There was this wonderful map with the oil and gas exploration planning for Africa, which I saw for the first time, and it's just such a curtain raiser for what the issue really is.
I go through much worse, don't worry.
We also still work on the basis of extract, consume, and waste, and that there's no value added for many of the communities along the way. And I think this is something I clearly hear is hard to address from Africa alone. I think there is where we need to come together. And then there's these
guys have a stressful job.
Maybe false opportunities we claim that there are with tackling climate change. Where are the good jobs with a decent pay? Where is the political leadership that was called for?
What?
The courageous politicians.
Did you just say testing?
Do they really find them today? I think today we are even moving into the opposite direction. Instead of coming together, we see a move towards a more fragmented world. People putting tariffs onto each other in order to not allow to trade with each other and work with each other. So that brings me to the conclusion: democracy is at risk. And what does that all mean for philanthropy? So on one side there is hope, which means we need to stay the course as philanthropy in terms of the objectives and in terms of the direction of travel. But we need to become better in order to address the challenges. The wind just step outside, turn your face into the wind. That is, I think, the political wind as well that we are facing at the present point in time. And I'm sure there is a big shower going to come from time to time that is trying to undermine our morale and working together. But we need to be smart, because just running straight into the wind is not going to move us any step forward. So we need to be smart and clever. We need to zigzag in order to outsmart the wind and move forward. And that also means that we need to work together. And somebody put it very nicely yesterday in 2 words. I think it was our friend from the United States who said, "Let's connect." Because if we struggle on our own fields in the global south and in the global north, I don't think and I don't believe that we're going to make headway in order to get the systems change that is required. Our systems in the global north and the global south hang together so closely, so we need to move on both sides. So this systems change needs to be organized. And for that, I think we need a one world movement, because we have one planet and that needs one single movement. So yesterday there were already some concrete recommendations in the discussions in terms of what could philanthropy do. So philanthropy definitely should help co-creation, should build bridges between the north and the south. Philanthropy should be more patient. So people were calling for, don't invest onto little projects which only have a lifetime of a year or 2. you need to be there for a longer journey. That is something that will provide continuity and that will really empower people. Think of the legacy. What do you want to leave after your engagement? There must be institutional, there must be systems change at the end of the day. And that also requires that you need to build trust with your partners and you need to co-invest in also many of the local ideas and initiatives that are there. That is going to build new trust that we really need in these stormy times in order to get to solidarity, equality, and sustainability. So today I'm very interested in continuing to connect with all the people who are attending the conference and to continue to explore, from my point, what this all means for philanthropy's role in the transition and in the transformation. So with that little summary, I hope we have a right starting point to get into today's meeting. And you are really great people in moving things forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that recap, Arthur. I think we are now set on course for the day's business. Before I hand over to my co-MC to introduce the next panel, just a little bit of housekeeping. So a reminder that yesterday you would have received the bingo cards. I hope those of you have them. So the two things you must have is a rock and a bingo card. So if you still have it, please do fill it out as we go through the sessions. At lunchtime, we will tell you where to put that in a box, where we'll tell you where the box is at that time. And then we'll be doing a draw at just after the 4 p.m. tea time this afternoon for our special prize. So please do participate in that. And then with regards to the lanyards. So we know that the lanyards that we get at conferences are nice, but if we go home, they just end up somewhere in a drawer, and you don't really use them. So for sustainability purposes, we would also love to ask you that if you are leaving throughout the day and you know you're not coming back, or at the end of the day, we will remind you again. If you are not coming back, or at the end of the day when you leave, we will. There's a box, I believe it's a transparent box in the foyer. Yeah, a transparent box in the foyer where you can just drop the lanyard and the pouch. You can obviously keep what's inside this little paper as a memorabilia of your time here with the colleagues. So with that, I then hand over to my co-MC. Sorry, we found a passport as well. If you lost your passport, just have a look and then obviously tell us what your name is, and then we'll check if it's your passport. But please. Oh, fantastic.
Oh. Thank you so much. I think this is a beautiful segue into what you just shared with us, Arthur, and that there is hope. When we all come together and collaborate and actually help each other, there's hope for us to find all that we are searching for. I'd love for us to segue into our next session, and this will be Governing Sustainability, Climate and Energy Democracy for a Just Future. For a Just Future, it advocates for integrating sustainability into all levels of governance, ensuring that this transition to a low-carbon economy is both environmentally sound and socially just. This approach is also strongly supported by the F20's recommendations to the G20, and which emphasizes on the need for inclusive decision-making processes and climate solutions that are equitable, and also acknowledging the contributions and the vulnerabilities of those most affected by these environmental challenges. And to usher us into this amazing, impactful session is Raiz. She's the Climate Governance Lead at Democracy Works. Also, shout out to Democracy Works. You guys have put together an amazing session. This has been an amazing forum. And she's also an intersectional environmental feminist. Can you guys please help me welcome Raiz? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Babalwa. So yesterday we spoke obviously a lot about finance and kind of sort of abstract concepts, that can seem very removed from the everyday realities of governments, local governments, and communities. And so this session explores kind of the urgent need to embed principles of democracy, accountability, participation, and equity within climate and energy governance. Just from the African continent, 2/3 of Africans continue to express a preference for democracy and continue to reject kind of authoritarian alternatives. But a recent Afrobarometer survey found that in countries like South Africa and Mali, there's a increased kind of disillusionment in democracy and the kind of socio-economic value or transformation that it can kind of bring. And even more worrying, over half of Africans feel that even military rule would be welcome if it could provide that kind of socio-economic transformation. And so kind of climate and energy democracy then, or climate and energy governance, is obviously not separate from these trends, but rather deeply mirror or are deeply embedded within these kind of broader governance frameworks. And so, where governance fails to be inclusive and transparent, and where energy transitions risk becoming technocratic, we see this kind of extractive and unjust manifestations of energy and democracy governance. And so this session will explore, or in this session we will explore with our keynote speakers really what trust, transition, and transformation looks like within the energy and climate governance space. And we will start the session with a keynote address by two speakers, and then we will go into two dialogues. And there's a bit of a technical consideration. Basically, if you look on your menu, on your schedule card, there will either be a protea or a penguin. And so all the people with proteas, please stay in this room, and all the people with penguins, you can make your way to the breakaway room. But we will start with a keynote address now. So once the keynote speakers have finished, then please, the penguins, please move to the breakaway room, and you can waddle if you want to. Yes, so I'd like to then welcome our first keynote speaker, that is Zarina Mula. She is the head of implementation in Africa for C40 cities.
Thank you so much, Raisa. And I must say, I'm so pleased to be here away from the endless Zoom calls and engagement and meeting people and interacting in person. My name is Zarina Mula. As Raisa said, I'm the head of implementation for Africa at C40 Cities. For those of you who don't know C40 is a network of mayors from world-leading cities working together to take bold, ambitious, and inclusive climate action. I'm going to start with a little story about my personal background. I've been working in the climate change and city space since 2010. And at that time, cities had half a person working in the climate change space, some zero. And every time you talk about climate change, it's linked to the environment and hugging trees. Fast forward to 2025, and things have changed significantly. Cities have progressed, yet there remains numerous challenges. African cities are booming. They are economic hubs. centers of employment and innovation and cultural activities. Yet, cities are still places where 60% of the urban population live in informal settlements or overcrowded spaces. We face, in Africa, 29% of our living costs are higher than non-African cities. And this is exacerbated by a growing infrastructure deficit in our cities. Added to that now, we bring in the climate change impacts, where the vulnerable communities in our cities are the most impacted. Often we find that cities and places where cities are impacted more, and the impacts of flooding, heat stress, and general climate impacts are higher than everywhere else. So when we talk about growth in our cities, we're not just talking about growth economically, we're talking about how we ensure that our growth is just, equitable, and sustainable for all. So at C40, we started working with our cities to think about how do we tackle this growth from a climate change angle. And we started working with our cities in 2019 to develop climate action plans that outline a pathway to achieve climate resilience, inclusivity, and net zero carbon by 2050. All 13 of our C40 cities in Africa have these climate action plans. But what we learned from this process is that the cities cannot do it alone. Only 5% of the actions outlined in these climate action plans actually can be done by the cities unilaterally. Cities need partnerships and collaboration, not from just national governments and the private sector, but from communities at large to achieve the climate ambition that we have set out. So in 2022, once we finalized the climate action plans with our cities, many of our cities said, we have these plans, but what now? How do we translate that into implementable actions? Funded by UK Aid, we started a program called the Climate Action Implementation Program. It's not just focused on Africa. I work in the Africa team, but it's working in Latin America and Southeast Asia. And we're really working with cities to think about how do we integrate climate change into a city's mandate of service delivery, focusing on implementing 2 climate actions. In Africa, we're looking at waste and energy, and focusing on mainstreaming climate action. What do we do to integrate climate change into our everyday lives, into policy, processes, and plans? How do we build capacity? How do we engage stakeholders and build trust across our cities? So these are some of the lessons that we've learned in this process. Some of it is obvious, some of it has been challenging, some of it has been a long journey, and we're still learning. The first step to transformation is transformation within. Cities are big engines. It's not just a climate change department or environment. It's transport, it's energy, it's urban planning. And it's all these sectors, finance, they need to come together to really tackle the problem of climate change. So we're working with cities to think about how do we integrate climate change into integrated development plans, annual action plans, transport plans, energy plans, spatial development plans. And in some cities, it's working better than others. In Joburg, we've integrated climate change into business plans. This chief finance officer is establishing a finance committee. In other places, it takes longer, and it's all about context. We've established steering committees so that departments can talk across each other to talk about climate change. And we've introduced political leadership classes where we're getting political leaders to engage on the climate change issues so they can inform decision-making processes and engage national government with tools to bring home the climate change needs and urgency. The other thing that has been very interesting in this process is building trust. Building trust amongst all stakeholders requires consistency and a clear, tangible outcome. We've worked on many different stakeholder engagement platforms, consulted widely, but where we found the biggest impact is where we had a very clear end goal and we were consistent in our approach. An example is we recently launched a cold storage unit, a renewable energy cold storage unit in City Park Market in Nairobi. We started the process in 2022, engaging the market traders, understanding their needs, listen to their stories about rising temperatures, increased food spoiling, and reduced income from higher cost of purchasing the food. In that process, we co-created a solution with them and were able to launch the product this year. It required a systemic change in the city. Many departments needed to be engaged and work together, which wasn't normal business as usual in the city. It required really a new systems thinking for the city. And then to really cement it, we needed the leadership. So the picture here is the Governor Sakaja of Nairobi talking to the community and telling them that this is just the beginning process. We need to grow more, we need to engage more, and we need to build more of these markets citywide. This has managed to, it sounds like just one market, and everybody says, what about the scale? But this tangible outcome has managed to change the hearts and mindsets of the market traders on the ground. And it's managed to change the hearts and mindsets of the city officials that are working on the project, because they're seeing something tangible and they're seeing what responding to climate change can do for their economy, for their livelihoods, and for their daily life. The other thing is climate action is contextual. I think yesterday somebody mentioned that Africa is not uniform. African cities are not uniform. Every city has different contexts, and we need to think about those local solutions. So, for example, in Addis Ababa, we worked with small, medium enterprises looking at their challenges of decentralized composting. We learned that their quality and quantity of compost was insufficient to meet the standards to increase their income. So we worked with them to improve that process and gave them new tools and new methods and significantly increased the quality and quantity of the compost produced. And in that way, we realized that the city needs to introduce composting standards and create a systemic change. It sounds small again, but that through that process, we're able to think about what policies and frameworks needs to inform the change that we need to see on the ground. Another example is a central picture where we worked with the city of Joburg on how we can establish private-public partnerships in the waste sector. And we realized simple things like the type of waste that is generated is not sorted properly, it's not cut to size, and we're training city officials on the ground on how to chip their waste so the private sector can collect it and take it. So that's enabling us to increase the diversion of waste from landfill, because we are able to identify the solution and identify the local needs to tackle the crisis. And then the other thing is, and I think from 2010 we've been saying this, the language that we need to communicate climate change needs to be relatable to the people on the ground. We need to be transparent, and we need to talk the language of the communities that we engage in. So one of the things that we did, I don't know if there's any Nigerians in the space, we engaged the local social media influencer Tawuma in Lagos to produce a skit on climate action. I was very apprehensive at first. The language on the skit was strange. It had a bit of a weird dialect, and it didn't really talk to the key issues of climate change. But it used the local language, and people were able to understand it, interact with it, engage with it. And through the skit, it's just been incredible to see the number of engagements, comments, support from the community. Starting just from picking one piece of litter up, she brought in issues of flooding and how waste impacts our stormwater drainage and how we need to all be responsible and take climate action in whichever way we can. The picture on the right is how we communicate emission reductions. We always say, we're going to achieve this amount of CO2. But what does it mean for the community on the ground? So in Johannesburg, we engage in informal settlement, and we really help them to understand what changing from traditional methods, often some of them were not electrified, so they're using candles and paraffin, what that would mean in terms of cost savings for their annual basis. And we're able to tell them the stories of how this could save them money, in addition to improving their health and their income by introducing renewable energy solutions. So I think just in conclusion, the examples that I provided are small wins, but we always need to have the bigger picture in mind and think about the transformational impacts that we would achieve by taking these small steps within our cities. So in this process, what are we trying to do is work with cities to scale up our approaches through policy interventions, institutionalizing this change, or developing big financial models using the real-life examples and achievements that we made on the ground. We facilitate learning and knowledge exchange across our cities. So simply by taking Dar es Salaam to Accra, they're able to learn about how to introduce an informal waste strategy, how to engage informal waste workers, how to introduce health and safety. And it really helps to galvanize and motivate people on the ground when they're seeing what other cities are doing and seeing that it can be a change. What has been very interesting from this program is we're really looking at how we can exchange Africa to Africa. Often when an African city goes to Europe, they see this amazing infrastructure and, state-of-the-art technology, but the practicality of Africa on the ground and working these solutions makes it unfeasible. But by exchanging across the region, we realize that there's so much opportunity out there, and there's so much local solutions that we can learn and adapt from that it's really helping to scale up the process. And then lastly, I think, to be honest, we haven't done this enough, but we need to do more, is really influence our national agendas. Using real-life examples on the ground. Cities is where things happen. This is where the road hits the fan. We really need to use the experiences from the ground and influence our national agendas and really engage national government to take bolder action, work with national government to impact change at that scaled level. I think yesterday somebody said it quite nicely. We've always used the phrase, we need African solutions for African problems, but in the finance session, somebody said, we need African solutions for global problems. And I think that is one of the key things that's been quite a big takeaway from this program. So I'd like to close here, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Serena. I think, kind of big takeaways from that is around the kind of localization and subnationalization of all of these kind of national commitments. Yesterday when we were talking about country platforms, what does that mean at a subnational level? And obviously Africa being one of the fastest urbanizing geographies in the world, we really need to be focusing on its urban centers. And then another big takeaway, obviously, is this need for kind of networked governance, network models of learning and development. And with that, I'd like to welcome onto stage Paula Quintas, who is the Vice President of Collective Intelligence and Flagships at the BMW Foundation.
I love to prepare PowerPoints, but I don't have a PowerPoint today. So, good morning. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Trace. First and foremost, I have a disclaimer because every time that I come to a country that has a BMW plant, people think that the BMW Foundation is about cars. So, over the last 55 years, we have been supporting leaders and connecting networks across the globe to promote change and to influence responsible economies, contributing to future-proof societies, hoping to influence the industry, of course, and hoping to shift the things on our donor, definitely. I hope they are not watching. So I'm here, as my title explains, to bring the perspective of collective intelligence, to bring the ideas. I feel that I'm here representing the ideas, the knowledge from all the people that work with us, from all the leaders that we had been collaborating over the last years. I was suggested by Raisa to talk about governance mechanisms and policies to better engage civil society and to support energy decision-making. But before arriving there, please allow me to create a bridge. As I understand, this slot in the morning is about transition. But since we are on a transition, please allow me to transit again. So to me, when we talk about trust, I'm sorry, it's hidden, but trust, transition, and transformation, I think we need to add a preposition, because there is no transition and transformation without trust. Most of our current failures, in advancing transition and transformation, stem from a lack or absence of trust. Sometimes it's the trust in people, sometimes it's the trust, or most of the time, the trust in institutions and organizations, and sometimes even in ourselves. I will leave the last one to our therapists, to our family, so I will focus on the first two. So the 2025 Trust Barometer, one of the most well-known studies on the field, show that the shift to acceptance showed a shift to the acceptance of aggressive action, to political polarization, and a deepening fears of giving rise to a widespread sense of grievance. 61% of the people questioned from 28 countries, from Africa, from Brazil, my hometown, from US and Europe, they said that they have a moderate or a high sense of grievance, which is defined by this belief that government and businesses, they are making their life harder, they are not supporting, they are serving just to their own interests, and that they are just benefiting the wealthy and unfairly distributing and unfairly creating even more gaps on the system. So how can we talk about civic participation when engagement in a scenario like this? How can we build trust in societies that don't feel included or even consider on most of the decisions? First and foremost, we must acknowledge that history and acts that brought us here cannot be undone or forgotten. So dealing with our past, with our responsibilities, is the primary way to pave a way to the future. So we must rebuild trust through dialogue and reconciliation. Establish ongoing platforms for dialogue to rebuild and to really acknowledge these past grievances and ensure that civil society are genuinely addressed into policy outcomes. Sometimes when we talk about this, we tend to go too much, and after the examples that we just heard, we are always in between the small scale and the bigger scale. And sometimes when we talk about how to engage communities, we tend to think about big mechanisms or big platforms, and we forget that this should start from the small scale. How can we build international collaboration if we don't know the names of our neighbors? How can we really shift things if we discuss in closed doors and we don't carry on the commitments that we make in such spaces? And please, this is not a generalization. I know that each one of us are bringing this forward, but how can we influence the people that are not on the space, the people that are our families, the people that sometimes not even understand what we are talking about, or they feel overwhelmed by the topics that we bring, or the pathways that are not clear or that aim for 50 years from now? I come from a mid-size town in the deep south of Brazil. In Germany, I would say a big town because it's really 300,000 inhabitants. And what my roots teach me about how to feel included and how to build community and civic participation in the first 18 years of my life, long time ago, it was really like, how could we take action and how could we act and work with our communities? Back in the 90s, I was taught by my grandpa on sorting recyclables to support or to fund a century-old elderly home. I was accompanying my mom to go to the cities, to the farmers market, to understand that nature has cycles, that the food and everything that we consume comes from different nature cycles and different that need to be respected. And also how to look to the other and not feel comfortable if the people in the room don't feel seen and included. Sometimes when invited to do a keynote like this one, we tend to tell impressive stories of transformation or our hero's journey. I invite us to make this summit our transformation journey. The OSD report on building trust and reinforcing democracy talk about these challenges of citizen disconnection from traditional civic and political process. It emphasizes strengthening democratic governance to protect individual rights and well-being. It highlights that we need to fight and combat misinformation, that we need to ensure representation and participation. But really, how can we include and make people belong to these processes? And how can we build resilience against other foreign influence, especially in our global south? I loved the quote yesterday that mentioned, trust starts when philanthropy listens before designing. And I must say that this principle should apply to all our sectors. Governments can better engage in civil society, in climate engagement through presence, through creating space, but mainly through listening. Here are some examples that I put together. So first and foremost, how can we build inclusive and policy platforms in Africa and Latin America? How can we create multi-stakeholder advisory committees to really build forums in which stakeholders can collaborate at early stages of policymaking? In Brazil, for example, I don't know if you know, but Brazil has built since the last government started from Lula, a council for economic development and social development called Conselhão, for the ones that speak Portuguese, and includes diverse representation to build long-term policies. How can we have transparent consultation processes that implement a structured listening process that everyone can ensure that diverse voices are heard? How can we create legal institutional frameworks for participation? How can we do the capacity building so much needed that was mentioned a few minutes before? Integrating these actions with democratic governance is vital. Setting long-term priorities, understanding that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Adapting democratic institutions to the digital age. We know that we are failing on it. We are failing on understanding how can we engage. And I was impressed by, I was not sure if it would work, but you invested on a different way of communicating because you knew that was critical to your need. And how can we both advance local and international cooperation? At the BMW Foundation, we had been working on bringing philanthropists to the public-private partnerships table, acting not only as funders, but as active participants, taking on the risk, being patient, and enabling the most important people. We have a first prototype in Latin America called Collaborative Action Platform, both supporting the scalability of the local solutions, but also supporting the critical levers of it: financing, policy, communication, and local protagonism. Coordination through formal partnerships can help everyone to work together. I know our morning is about transition, but to finish my talk, I would love to add another T to our discussion: transparency. Trust is the foundation, but requires consistency, transparency, and genuine inclusion. The ultimate goal is shared power and solutions that work for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula. I think a theme that's kind of recurring over the last 2 days is really this idea of consistency, and that trust isn't kind of built overnight, but it's about kind of consistently showing up. And so thank you for bringing that in again. Now we can kind of take a few minutes to move into the sessions, give the speakers some time to come onto the stage or to make your way to the breakaway room. But thank you for your attention during the keynote addresses. And we hope that you can kind of bring that kind of time, energy, and creativity to the next dialogue sessions. Thank you.
شفنفن دبربر هاوي كيبته دفنفن حبيبه فقر بعدي الحن واي واي فنفن دبربر هاوي كيبته دفنفن حبيبه فقر بعدي الحن
Hello? 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 Is it working? Oh. Great, so thank you and welcome. We are going to go into a dialogue session. I'll just explain a little bit about how the kind of technical aspects of it will work. Basically, we will pose some questions to the panelists for them to have a discussion between themselves, and then we will open up a Mentimeter. Can we have the Mentimeter on screen so I can just go through it? If you can scan the QR code, it will allow you to kind of interact with the session, ask questions, or pose questions to the panelist. And then we will kind of do our best to answer those questions through the discussion. So I would like to welcome and introduce our guests. We have Ashraf Patel. He is the Research Associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue. And then we have Irvin Tengku Harja, who is from Indonesia, from the Habibie Center, and is the Program Manager for Just Energy Transitions. And then we have Brenda Martin, who is an independent advisor around energy transitions in South Africa. And last but not least, Dora Marema, who is the portfolio head for municipal sustainability, infrastructure delivery, spatial transformation services, and inclusive communities. And I don't know, Dora, if you wrote that title yourself, but it's a big portfolio. I'd like to just start the session with kind of just getting an orientation of where everyone in the room is from. So if you could just plot where you are in the world. Obviously, we have a big representation from South Africa, some South American colleagues joining us, from Argentina, someone from in the ocean there, I don't know. And then Europe and the United States. So a good kind of global reach. This session is really to kind of unpack the kind of concept of energy and climate democracy, and to really interrogate what that means within our kind of local context. So Ashraf, maybe starting with you, how would you define climate and energy democracy? Oh, you.
Okay. Thanks, Raisa and colleagues. I think the starting point would be my own experience. Several months ago, I was in another workshop, and it was on climate change and development, and they had some kind of poll and asked delegates, and many of them were youth in NGOs. How many of you have participated in making inputs or co-shaping the climate change bill? And as you know, in South Africa, we've got a climate change bill. And to everyone's horror, not more than 20% of those involved in climate change actually made any input into a national legislative process that has a lot of traction and has had a lot of publicity. So I would say that just using a public policy lens kind of shows that the discussion is still very elitist. It's still policy technocratic, and there's very little, if at all, genuine participation by communities in shaping the climate change laws. Most of the inputs in the climate change bill were mainly government departments, international organizations, and large corporates. And some kind of elite NGOs. But aside from that, there was actually no public participation in shaping the climate change bill. So I think that could be a very good entry point into the debate.
Thank you so much from that. Can we move on then to Irvin, just on your definition of climate and energy democracy, maybe from the Indonesian perspective?
Yeah, thank you so much, Raisha, first of all. Good morning, everyone. My name is Irfan from the Habibie Center, a think tank founded by the Chair President of Indonesia, Mr. President B.J. Habibie, and I'm based in Jakarta, Indonesia. And it's truly a pleasure to be here with so many passionate voices from across global south, particularly African continent and also Latin America. I believe that voice will shape our energy and climate futures, and I've realized and observed and noticed that I'm the only participant coming from Southeast Asian region, so nice to be here. Yeah, I think, Raisa, our calls for the energy and climate democracy requires both moral and practical reasons to support their positions. One of these is the need to get all stakeholders in the energy system to accept changes. This is pushing policymakers and energy companies to deal with the societal and environmental impacts of energy policy, which are actually political. In addition, when the public is more involved in the decision-making process of energy policy about how to manage resources and energy, it leads to a better governance. Yeah, a question of energy democracy, in my opinion, is a question of values. We acknowledge that we have many technologies that could support energy transitions. This includes nuclear energy, hydropower plant, geothermal, and other large-scale renewable energies, including small-scale distributed energies, carbon capture and sequestration, and so on, you name it. But we must remember that none of these technologies is without societal and environmental risks, costs, and complications. So when we came across the term energy democracy, we learned that it's a process of social movement. Yeah, I see that energy democracy is a process of social movement which is evolving everywhere, in many places. This is working to change the way energy is used in our society. Yeah. And also, it is described as involving three related but separate approach to help just a transition becomes a just transitions. This effort includes resist, reclaim, and restructure energy systems. Resist, reclaim, and restructure energy systems are about making our energy industry and the way it's made is more democratic. This is about the people and communities taking back control of their energy choices. Yeah. And they are setting up a new energy providers which are managed and owned by the public for the public interest. I think I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, a very important point around kind of values and how values are kind of socio-culturally informed and will change across the world. And so the solutions that we develop need to be informed by that. Brenda, your kind of definition of energy and climate democracy.
First of all, I want to congratulate you on not having a manual. There's so many places we go to. It's just, that's it, especially when you talk about energy. I think to add to what my fellow panelists have said so far, the big element of an energy democracy is one which is more broad-based, because there's been such a shift. I do the stakeholder mapping work, and most of the time I'm noticing a shift towards centralization, towards command and control, fractured efforts. All of those things are appearing in the landscape. I think fractured efforts are where I would rather trust, because fractured efforts mean that there's diversity, there's more of a broad-based access to making choices and all of those things that matter very much to society. For me, energy democracy is very much about having control, having choices, having access. There's so many available choices at the moment that are only available and accessible to those who have money, or to those who are close to money. And all of those things have relationship to how decisions are made, how choices are made, who's protected, how vulnerable parts of society are considered. These are all parts of features of what I would say healthy energy and climate democracy. And I think the centralization point is something I want to come back to. It is very worrying, and especially in terms of controlling access.
Yeah, I think also some very good points around kind of, fragmentation can be good at a certain point in the process because it means that there's some sort of decentralization of that decision making, or at least of the discussion, and that obviously then more collective efforts follow that. Thank you, Dora.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity. So for me, how I define climate and energy democracy, it's about recognizing the fact that for us to be able to attain it, we need to deal with these issues through inclusive and participatory approaches, taking into consideration the people who are going to be affected the most by the climate emergency, by lack of access to energy, and bringing their voice. But not only that, ensuring that they are participating, or they actually are able to reap some of the benefits of climate action or climate transitions or energy transitions. Because for me, it's really important, because I think just building on what Brenda is saying, if you centralize, you only engage and consult those that can get into the room, that can fly, that can speak English, that can have access to an email or internet, you are excluding huge populations who are literally on the front line of energy poverty, in the front line of disasters and lack of climate action. So for me, it's really just embedding the principles of accountability, transparency, participation in dealing with issues of climate change, in dealing with issues around energy access and the transition. If you embed that, you start to talk about inclusive governance. You start to talk about not looking at people as users of the technology or of the solutions, but actually you bring them onto the table to be able to firstly diagnose the problem correctly and then identify the interventions that you believe, or the actions that you believe are going to be able to resolve the problem. Because I think many times we go to the people who are affected the most with the solutions already, or we believe, firstly, we conceptualize the problem statement, and we go to them and say, we want to engage. Well, in fact, yesterday where I was at the Rise Africa, there was a huge talk around not engagement, but consultations. We want to go and consult them on the problem statement that we have and some possible solutions. And we say we've had a day engagement with this grouping, and that as a result represent the voice. No, it's about really participatory processes of diagnosing the situation or the problem correctly together with them. Because they, at the end of the day, they are the ones who are the front line. For them, it's not a matter of complying or coming up with innovations. It's a matter of survival. So they understand the problem correctly. And if you involve those that are in the front line in terms of diagnosing the problem correctly, then you are able to start building on and coming up with actions that are going to be actionable.
Yes. Can we change the slide? I'd like to kind of invite the audience now to answer or to pose some questions to the panelists while we're kind of having the discussion, and then to perhaps also share your. You can either pose a question or you can maybe share your definition of how kind of you see climate and energy democracy. I think for me, climate democracy and energy democracy is really about intersectionality and kind of understanding how climate then links to other struggles that people have, and how that kind of those struggles are embodied within individuals and communities. And I think the lack of climate and energy democracy obviously doesn't exist within a vacuum. Climate governance doesn't exist within a vacuum. And almost like the financial system, or climate finance is just reflective of the broader financial system. Climate governance is also just reflective of the broader governance system. And so going into that, Dora, maybe I can go to you again just to talk a little bit about local government, subnational governments in South Africa, and how they are kind of navigating the climate space within their broader governance systems. How is that kind of integration happening?
So I think the colleague in the beginning spoke about the Climate Change Act, which has got a whole focus on the responsibility of local government. And I think it's very clear in terms of the structures that needs to be set up, to put in place. The districts and metros are supposed to develop the climate action plans, but first identify the needs, package that into actions, and actually set up climate change forums that comprises of all of the stakeholders to be able to look at what are the challenges and what are the actions, and then report to the provincial climate change forums. So I think there is now, with the Climate Change Act, it sets out the work. But in terms of, because remember, this act just recently got passed, which is last year, municipalities had to really look at how can they be able to mainstream climate change governance into their usual governance structures that are there in place. Initially, it was looked at as something that is an unfunded mandate, something that is peripheral. But what we have been doing through my organization is to say, you look at the entire service delivery mandate of local government. Climate change really has to be seen or embedded within all of that. How you deliver your houses, how you deliver electricity, how you deliver water and sanitation, it has to be embedded. And as a result, all of the committees, and the mayoral committees and the various MMCs dealing with all of these then needs to be really empowered to be able to understand what are the implications of climate change within their mandate, and as a result, be able to report that and engage. So it is something that I think is a lens that we are pushing within local government, because you also do not want to have a situation where it is sitting with one department and not being mainstreamed within the operations or the running of local government. And there has been a concerted effort in pushing municipalities to have climate change champions, both politically and administratively. Someone that will actively be able to mobilize internally within the organization or the institution of a municipality around the issues of climate change. Whenever they are sitting at a council meeting and a project is being presented, to say, but I do not see how that is going to address the current challenges that we have in terms of climate change. So I think there is a concerted effort, and I think Zarina touched on some of the work that has been done in terms of peer learnings, city-to-city exchanges, literally, taking eThekwini to Cape Town and Kucha to Stellenbosch and those kind of things, and starting to say, this is how we have been able to institutionalize the issues of climate change, and we believe this is how you could be able to do it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I think maybe that's a good segue to one of the questions. Within that kind of mainstreaming, Brenda, could you share how, not just in a governance kind of framework, but in a broader societal or even service delivery frameworks, how we can kind of avoid this kind of siloing, which was one of the questions from the audience, is how we can kind of avoid siloing and really mainstream, really integrate a climate agenda into all kind of spheres of governance and decision making.
Yeah, I think it always has to come back to what are the principles and approaches that people in all parts of our society, of our economy, what are the kinds of principles that people subscribe to? If there's a subscription and a real commitment to democracy, to climate democracy and energy democracy, you will integrate into all of the structures, all of the practices, those issues, transparency and accountability in particular. I think when it comes to local government, yesterday I was attending a talk on crisis management. Gareth Morgan and Peter Willis wrote this book. And one of the points Gareth made was that trust isn't something you establish in a crisis. Mm-hmm. It's every single day you turn up for work, every single day you engage, you send a bill, at the city level, it's all about that. And when that trust is there, when there is a crisis, things work. When it comes to silos, I mean, for me, it fundamentally relates to how we hold each other and performance to account. So everywhere you go, entities have performance metrics. You know, these indicators that say whether you've done your job or whether you've delivered. Many of those people who are operating in the space, and I've interviewed a lot of officials across national and provincial government, it is not in your interest to cooperate, to partner, because that doesn't count. You're counted on what you deliver in your individual capacity, in your department's capacity. We need to value partnership, and we need to allow for our systems to take into account how rich partnerships contribution can be to outcomes. So I think that there's some real big fundamentals that need to shift, and part of it's got to do with how we value and judge performance. And that can help with silos. But I think those are big projects, which Dora knows very well how difficult it is to shift those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good point around kind of having those performance metrics across mandates, you know?
And expand them to include how do you partner?
Yeah.
How healthy are those partnerships? Mm-hmm. And how accountable are you to your partnerships, whether they be with stakeholders, that are citizens or forums or whatever they may be. But we need to judge those as much as we judge and value and reward outputs that are at the individual or at the departmental level.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I have a question for Irvin. Since you do come from the Habibi Foundation, this one's on considering your views on energy and climate democracy. One, how philanthropy develops grant pipelines. And two, starts multiple projects in parallel. So I think, how do we kind of inform that targeting based on principles of climate and energy democracy? And then how do we kind of choose how projects kind of complement one another?
Yeah, thank you, Raisa. I think when we talk about the energy democracy, philanthropy and civil society organization becomes very important. They can represent the idea of energy democracy or make it happen. They can spread the idea of energy democracy by partnering with another social groups, for example, like the academics, mass media, faith-based organization, even political parties to mainstream the energy democracy. I think, I think that's one of the choices or effort that we can do in terms of what's the role of the civil society organization. This position, the Habibi Center is a think tank. Actually, we produce policy brief, policy analysis, and papers, and give the input for the policymakers. Yeah, I think policymakers, member of parliaments, for example, they must be seen as more than just a target of advocacy. They must be seen as a partner in making change. What we've done so far is we have identified and built a good relationship with a member of parliaments, and we offer them policy brief, technical inputs, and sometimes offer opportunities for peer learning. Yeah. By doing so, we hope that political parties or members of parliaments can be motivated to spread the idea of energy democracy within their parties or their political environment. Yeah.
I think that's a very important point around kind of political leadership. And maybe also political parties don't necessarily have the literacy or the knowledge around kind of climate issues. And so to do that nitty-gritty work with them is so essential, so that they can kind of integrate that into their strategic planning as well. Ashraf, this question is for you, maybe from your activist days. Hopefully continued activist kind of identity, is how are local governments held accountable, and this is obviously from the South African context, when they don't announce IDP engagements for community participation or disregard community inputs. And I think this question is something that Democracy Works Foundation grapples with a lot. Is one, how do they collect community-based data? How do they even understand and interpret that data? And then how is it practically integrated into their decision-making platforms and processes?
Thanks, Raisa. Thanks for the question. I think it sort of reminds me of my first engagement with a large conference. Still, I was a young researcher. And we, Johannesburg, hosted at that time the World Summit on Sustainable Development. It was called the Joburg Summit, way back in 2002, I think. And that actually was at a point where there was a very vibrant democracy. We were quite young. And it allowed for community groups, non-governmental organizations, social justice movements, to really co-shape that agenda. There was lots of activism, very robust activism. And that time, it also opened up. So that conference was an opportunity to also open up dialogue with the city. And post that conference, there were lots of activities around local government, around citizen participation. And at that conference, we had really good global activists in climate and people participation. One of them, I'm not sure, we had David Corton, colleagues may remember, he was from the People-Centered Development Network, also based in Asia, I think Malaysia. And we attended some workshops that they presented, and we found that model to be really, really kind of participatory. It was less about the democratic, narrow participation, but it talked about people-centered development, which was locating the entire development process around the people-centered approach and then engaging the issue. So it was less about the symbolic democratic thing, which is very much rooted in constitutionalism, and it has its utility value, but it's not a solution on its own. So public participation, citizen participation, all the channels you create using data is just the message, the channel. Does not necessarily mean they're participating, because if you don't get a genuine people-centered development approach where they own their development processes, you get in what is called a disengagement from governance. That's what's happening in South Africa today with all these IDPs. So you have the IDP, which is integrated development planning. They get advertised in the press, and then only the large stakeholders that have an interest in the IDP, the developers, they attend and they shape the process. So there's very little capacity for the actual organizations that are beneficiaries. And I think we have a huge governance gap, absolutely huge governance gap. And we've seen it with the climate change bill. It's a fantastic piece of legislation, but if you really dissect and distill the participation, you'll find that there was very little community participation in that. And hence, you're not going to get the cooperation from communities because they see it as a very elitist process. And I think that's where the debate should take place.
Amazing. I think, very important to note that public participation is not necessarily community participation or kind of grassroots participation. And maybe a question for you.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
I mean, we have so many tools, so many electronic tools that we can use to track I've attended, I won't say which forum, but I've attended a national forum where it's called a public consultation, but people are not even allowed to comment in the chat, let alone, where's the place to submit a comment. And if you do submit a comment, you can simply track a Menti. There's so many tools that you can use to track what comments have been made, even up to the point of this is the submission that's been made to the presidency or whatever the case may be, the higher body. It's possible to track all the submissions that have come through and the source of them. Use a map, use something. We don't have to be doing these things manually, but those are the ways in which trust breaks down. When people can't see the point they made or the concern they had even considered in the finalized document. So I think those are things that we can improve so much when we're talking about consultation.
Yeah. I think it's so important to state that, the symptom of apathy is usually looked at instead of the actual cause of it.
Yeah.
And just this disillusionment and distrust in the process because nothing has been heard or integrated or tangibly kind of actualized. That kind of then brings me to one of the questions in a more practical sense then to you, Dora, and the work of Salga. The question is, how do you see the link between climate democracy and public participation in government budgets and spending decisions? And I guess that could apply to the IDP processes as well. What needs to transform, maybe even in the kind of regulated and legal frameworks around that? How can that public participation be integrated in a very tangible way?
I think, just probably kind of segues from this question that we are addressing. For me, when I think about local government, it is made of a triangle. So you've got the political leadership, you've got the administrative leadership, you then have got the community. And I think the community arm of local government, at least in South Africa, we are more and more gradually is fading away. And I think what we lacking is an investment in getting the community to realize that they are actually a stakeholder within their municipality or within their local government. That it is not a local government until the community has got really a part of the part of it, right? So, and I think it is, yes, it could be given all sorts of reasons why that has literally broken down, because definitely there was a time when community was very vibrant, the community was participating, they knew what was happening, but it was not only just a knowing, it was they were taking part in shaping the programs and the interventions and whatever the budgets that are allocated. So it is, I think we need to strengthen that, and we need to be realistic about it. From our side as Salga, that's one of the priorities, is to really identify that. In terms of climate change, the past 2 financial years we've been focusing on supporting municipalities to host just transition dialogues. Just for example, even from just transition climate change dialogues, where intentionally we are bringing in civil society organizations established, but also community-based and small businesses, because the conversation, the mayor has to have a conversation with the people in his constituency who are going to be affected by climate change or the transition, and be able to look at, in my area, in my municipality, say, for example, in the Eastern Cape, with the automotive industry, what are the areas that are going to be impacted? And as a result, what are the conversations that they should be having to be able to shape the transition that needs to happen? And we putting together tools to be able to assist them to support. In this year, together with our other partners, including Italy and others, we are now constituting what we call the Town Hall Corps. There's an opportunity, for example, right now in South Africa, globally, we are working on the nationally determined contributions for the country. Where is the voice of the people? How are we going to make sure that that ambition is informed by what needs to happen on the ground. And through the local government and municipal authority constituency at the UNFCCC level, there's been work that has been done to come up with the concept of the town hall corps. And the town hall corps is saying mayors are going to call a town hall meeting of the various stakeholders, their constituency at a municipal level, to start really discussing the critical issues. And that all of those discussions are the discussions that would have been had through the IDP, because unless we integrate all of those issues into the integrated development plan that has to be budgeted for, then it's just talk shop. It is not; these are not interventions that are going to be informed or supported by the plan of the municipality, including the budget that is then attached to it. So that is the work that is happening, and it's very exciting. We've got already a list of mayors that have put up their hand. They're excited, and we've gotten now agreement and partnership with the Department of Environmental Affairs, that DFFE, that says we are going to listen. We are going to participate in these dialogues with the aim of ensuring that all of that now feeds into the draft NDC that has to be finalized before COP30.
Amazing work, and I think, just a very important point around kind of institutionalizing participatory processes and institutionalizing climate decisions within broader governance frameworks, and having local municipalities as the champions of that. Because that's the only way that it's going to be really broadened to kind of governance frameworks at that local level. So I'd like to pose the same question to Irvin around kind of how that institutionalization can happen. So there's all this talk about participation, but how is it kind of institutionalized? And do you have any examples of how the Habibie Center is kind of doing that, building that institutional capacity?
Yeah. I will share an example of Indonesia about the practice of energy democracy at the local levels. Yeah. In the situation of budget constraints faced by the local governments, what local governments can do is actually empower local communities to be able to manage their own energy sources. Actually, in Indonesia, there is a quiet revolution is taking place in few villages in Indonesia. It's called Desa Mandiri Energi, which means energy self-sufficient village. In this village, its goal is simple: to help communities, villagers, to meet all their power needs from local renewable resources and deepen the practice of energy democracy at the grassroots level. This is how it works. Villagers take a lead in every single process. So in each village which are taking part, villagers choose an energy council. Youth representatives, women representatives, traditional leaders all have seats at the table along with the village chiefs and technical experts. And also decisions happen in public. Every single decision, from how much money to borrow to what price to charge for the electricity, is discussed in open meeting. So the Energy Council, they also shares about its project plan, project preparations, project expansion, and its budget plans with the communities. And also people in this village, they learn by doing, villagers. Running and installing a mini solar system is not just about faults and arms. The villagers in this village, they learn to read technical manual guidelines, technical reports, managing accounts, solving technical problems, and so on. And what's interesting from this initiative is when a village becomes successful in managing their energy systems and governance process, neighboring communities want to learn from it. And in some cases, district officials, village officials, they organize field trips to enable energy councils exchange their blueprints and financial templates and so on and so on. This is what we try to, this is what the Habibi Center as a think tank wants to capture. We want to write a story about it, and in order to make this initiative to be replicated in other, in broader space across Indonesia. As a think tank, I think that's one of the initiatives that the Habibi Center is doing right now.
Amazing. I think, yeah, it's almost moving beyond this concept of energy democracy towards energy sovereignty, actually, and kind of deep empowerment and ownership of communities over their energy futures. So we're kind of coming to the end of our session now, and I just wanted to invite each of the panelists to maybe share a closing statement or a call to action, or kind of your hope for the future of kind of climate and energy democracy. Starting with Ashraf.
Thanks, Raisa. I think we're in the G20 year, and there's so much activity and conferences and seminars. I mean, this is my 7th G20 engagement, and it's now an overload. In fact, it reminds me what one professor said, over-democracy leads to poverty. And I can tell you, if we look at Africa, South Africa, India, Brazil, a lot of the democracies, they're living in poverty because there's this focus on consultation, which is important, but then it distracts from getting away from the core deliverables. So if you look at talking about energy sovereignty, energy superpower, the big champion today is China, and China is not a democracy. Now, that's an interesting dynamic that we need to probe. They're the number one green superpower. 60% of all investment in green energy is from China. And for 2 reasons. One is the government realized that if they don't deal with air pollution, the people are going to revolt. So they took a strategic decision to invest in every green technology on the planet. And together with the development state model, which is central, they've developed industrial plans, and today they're the champions of every technology, from solar to wind to nuclear to industrial. And as a result, the positive unintended consequences, they're the leader in the EV battery space, which today they've become a superpower for the world in a sense that they're making critical green technologies available for the global south at an affordable rate. Now, that's not to say democracy cannot achieve it, but you have different models in the world today, and for them it's working. And we need to now revive whether we have those capacities, and why are we not replicating some of those successful models. They've achieved it. And today, if you look at during the load shedding crisis, which we have, we had to import from China because they had the capacity at a lower price, at a reasonable quality, and we benefited. But had we taken decisions earlier on in our democracy to say we need proper planning, proper mobilization, yes, do the consultations. But today, if you look at all the forums, from IDPs to climate action plans, communities are in overdrive in consultation. They attend meetings upon meetings, which is important, but they don't have the capacity to participate. So have that capacity, but also note that the democratic ethos on its own is not going to lead to energy sovereignty. You've got to have that alignment with state and society. And currently, I see a disconnect between state and society. So we need to be sober. There are more successful models than just our models. And sometimes we need to be humble to say that if it works for China, they're the superpower today. What worked for them, we can also learn. Not to say just reduce it to a democratic issue, but they're successful. 500 million people out of poverty, unheralded in recent history. So let's look at all models and then say, okay, what works for us here? Let's learn. What works from the democratic world? But make it work for South Africa. I think that is the big message.
I have this one.
Oh, Thank you, Irfan.
I think short from me, closing statement is there is no social justice without energy transition, but the energy transition must absorb the values of social justice. Let's work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing. Short and sweet. Brenda?
Yeah. I'm not going to be that short, but
No.
I'll try. I think it's quite ironic. We have this notorious business guru at the moment claiming that diversity, equity, and inclusion is got to be cancelled everywhere. And I find it ironic because any person who understands managing risk, managing robustness, I mean, I'm a gardener and I know biodiversity, diversity among people, it strengthens you. So it strengthens the chance of success. So why on earth would we discard DEI? So I think that for me would be, we have to push back on that. Not only because it makes sense socially, but it makes sense from every other level as well, if we're managing risk. So that's just as an aside. But for this topic and the work that we're doing here and the people who are in the room, especially philanthropy foundations, I want to make an appeal around be careful who you are taking your advice from, who you're taking your line of march from. Consider what are their interests? Where are they coming from? Are they asking you to do and think about things and prioritize things that serve them or a narrow group of interests? Think about what it is that you're missing. What are the blind spots? We know how the whole landscape of funding and access to finance for climate especially, and I mean, energy can cover itself to many respects, but climate finance is so competitive as a space. And in that space, increasingly you have guardians. You have people who are holding the gate closed for as many as possible others who are needing to access what is available there. Watch out for that. And I think that if we're going to be talking about climate solutions and these kinds of things, we absolutely have to go back to first principles: diversity, equity, inclusion. Who are we including? Who are we excluding? And how are we guarding against our blind spots? So that would be my last point on this.
Thank you so much, Dora.
No, I think from my side, the one thing that really has been at the back of my mind is the role of the people that are in the room, which is these organizations and philanthropy, in terms of facilitating transformative democratic climate action and energy access for the people. And where are the people at the local level? And I think there has been a temptation to look at subnational governments, particularly local government, and say they are fraught, they are not working, there's corruption and this, and as a result, we are going to go in and support, firstly, I think, the national governments, but maybe even parachute and go directly to support communities. And I think that's really plausible and that's great. But what it does is that that approach, it not only weakens the institutions of the subnational governments or the municipalities, right? It also going to put the very communities that we really want to empower and to support in a state of perpetual vulnerability. When the funding ends, when the project ends, that intervention or that project, where does it lie? The municipality has got a constitutional mandate, at least in South Africa, to be able to provide service delivery, to make sure that communities are shielded from the disasters and all of those things. And it is important that when interventions are being brought, that this institution of local government is on board, so that the interventions that are being brought in and parachuted at community level can be able to be taken into consideration and institutionalized within this institution. And actually now the focus has to be on communities being empowered to hold this institution. This is the institution that by the Constitution has to serve them, has to support them, and we need to be able to strengthen it through the support that is coming, we need to look at how are we going to be able to, even if it's by directly working with the communities, we need to make sure that they are holding this institution accountable. They are able to make sure that what their issues are actually translated and included in this institution's plans and budget in the long term, so that we do not leave our communities in a state of perpetual vulnerability, because we contribute to weakening these institutions that are actually mandated by the various constitutions in the countries.
Thank you so much to our panelists, and I think the message is kind of clear and very much integrated across the different speakers, is that it really is about strengthening those local institutional frameworks and existing governance structures to kind of ensure that continuity within the work. And that the kind of configurations of those institutions really need to be critically kind of reassessed in terms of our own definitions of what democracy means, and what democracy kind of actualizes in terms of our cultures and values, and then obviously the need for kind of diverse voices in shaping those institutions as well. So if your questions haven't been answered, or you don't feel that you're satisfied with the kind of answers to your questions, they will be sent to the panelists to get a response. And those responses will be made available on our social media pages, on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. So please follow us, Democracy Works Foundation. Find us on social media, and you can engage further there around the questions that you have posed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we will now have the coffee break, and then meet you all back here at 11. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Ashraf.
Just another call for our colleagues outside who are having their coffee to please come inside for the session to start. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. If we can please take our seats, then we can get started. I hope everyone had a fantastic coffee break. I know these coffee breaks are much needed. They give us the energy to continue our day. For our next session, we are going to be focusing on the topic of catalyzing a just transition, specifically looking at the strategic role of philanthropy in climate financing. For this, we have a number of colleagues that will be joining us on stage. And I'm going to invite the moderator of our next session, who is Amadou Mbodj from the Fundación Avina. If we can please give him a round of applause as he comes onto the stage. Thank you.
Hi. Hello, everyone. So, my name is Amadou Mbodj. I come from Senegal, and I work for Fundación Avina. You may have heard about Fundación Avina. That is a global organization that drives processes designed to change systems. We are rooted in the Global South, and we impact the world through collaborative efforts that fosters human dignity and care for the planet. Our unique model is called collaboration. It's like a model highly effective in generating impactful, large-scale systematic changes. I would like to ask my friend to look at in my bag and give me this tool I call collaboration, so that you get familiar with it. Today, I'm honored to facilitate this panel about catalyzing a just transition, the strategic role of philanthropy in climate financing. I will be with my distinguished invitees. First of all, I will call on the stage Dr. Shanaz Musa. And hello, doctor. Please have a seat. Let me call Lisa Chamberlain. Hi, Lisa. Have a seat. Justine Sylvester. Last but not least, Severino Lima Jr., coming from Brazil. Hi, Severino. Have a seat. Please give them a round of applause. I told you about this tool we are proud of. That is our unique model for pushing for collaborative actions. It is this book we call Collaborate Action. I would like to invite you to discover it, and I will share it with you so that you could access it electronically. Before we move forward, I just want to give a few presentations of our distinguished panelists. First of all, Dr. Shanaz Musa. She's the director of Climate and Development Knowledge Network program. She oversees the finance hub at South-South North. Dr. Shanaz oversees the research program in the North region, in the Africa region, which support cutting-edge research on climate compatible development in Africa. She also provides technical input in a range of projects at South North, ranging from the Sustainable Settlements Facility to the Koyasa project. Thank you for being part of this panel, Doctor. After Dr. Shenas, Lisa Chamberlain from Environmental Justice Fund in South Africa. Lisa has spent more than 15 years working to advance social and environmental justice as a human rights lawyer, academic, and grant maker. She is the executive director of the Environmental Justice Fund. Thank you for being with us, Lisa. After Lisa, we have Severino Lima. Severino comes from Brazil. Articulation Secretary of Unicadores and founder of Latin American and Caribbean Network of West Speakers. Grassrooted West Speakers from Cocamar Corporation in Natal, Brazil. He is the founder member of and the first elected president of the International Alliance and West Speakers, which affiliate on 5 continents. Severino serves as the International Articulation Secretary of Unicatadores, and founded the Latin American and Caribbean Network of West Speakers, representing 14 countries. Obrigado, Severino. And Sylvester, Justin Sylvester, transition program. Justin Sylvester leads the Just Transition Program at the Climate Work Foundation, supporting energy transition initiatives in the Global South. With over 15 years of experience in philanthropy, he has led program strategies that fosters accountable governance for local communities at the Ford Foundation and others. Thank you all. Thank you, Justin, for being part of us. So, before we move forward, I have one question for all of you guys. Let's get a sense of the perspectives on the table today. So, starting with you, Dr. Shenas, what is just climate transition for you?
Sorry, Amadou.
The question is, what the meaning of just transition for you? Yeah.
Thank you. So I think it's quite, my sense is that's quite a loaded question. And
Closer.
no, they told me I must do nothing. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
It's okay now.
And when the term started emerging, it was just energy transition. And for those of us based in Africa, the bit about energy was quite triggering. And so it's really heartening to see the shift to the just transition. And what this is actually doing is starting to merge the mitigation and adaptation narratives into one that's about building resilience, but in a just and equitable way. And I think the just is really important while this transition is happening. I think what is also quite clear is that a lot of this has been driven by the North. And so to almost be very aware of that when in the Global South we're responding to this push to have a just transition. And I think still for those of us in the Global South working with communities on the ground that are responding daily to the climate emergency that's unfolding is how do we bring all that together in a way that does lead to a transition that is fair, equitable, and includes everyone, so no one is left behind. And for me, that is what the just transition can do, given the current geopolitics that's unfolding.
Can you please share with us a concrete example that translate it into practice?
Yeah. So I'm going to use the South African example where it's still unfolding, and I'm no expert on the South African just transition process. But for me, what was quite striking is how also it started as a just energy transition. And it's actually shifted completely into a just transition where even issues of informal labor is considered, the issues around care work, it's all coming to the front. And what's also unfolding there is this disparity between the rural and urban, and how often cities are being left out of the just transition conversations because your minds are not based close to cities. So I think what is happening in South Africa, and it is not an easy process because it's complex, but it is opening up for systemic change and coherence and a holistic approach to a really complex issue. So for me, it's a South African example, which, like I say, is still unfolding.
Thank you very much. So let's turn to Lisa. Lisa, could you please let us know from your perspective what is just climate transition?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, the transition is about the shift from an energy system that's based on fossil fuels to renewables. But as we all know, and as we talk about so often, it's about a lot more than that. That it's this invitation for us to reimagine, to think about, what is it that we haven't yet achieved, and how can we imagine a new kind of world and a new kind of society that we would want, and what needs to happen for us to get from here to there. And in this process of reimagination, who's making decisions, and in whose interests are they acting, and who's sitting at those tables of power. And one of the things that I think has been so striking over the last 2 days is there's a very, very clear theme that's running through all of the panels, all of the discussions, all of the coffee table khanakhanas. It's let communities lead. And I think if we were to sum up what a just transition means, that's how I would sum it up. Because this reimagination work, it's big work. It's complicated. The crisis is very, very complex. And of course, now we have to do it in a time of great urgency as well. The climate crisis is here. It's intensifying. We don't have time. We have to do it right now with all of these big issues. And so that's going to need all of us, all of the thinkers, all of the doers. I work for the Environmental Justice Fund, and our work is about supporting community-based organizations who are leading just transition and climate justice work in their communities at local level. And so our interest is really in supporting and figuring out what role community-based organizations in particular play in the just transition. And what's been emerging very clearly is that there's at least 3 ways in which the role of community-based organizations are key in making just transitions work. The first of those is about this question that we get so often is what is the just in just transition? And in the context of Global South discussions, sometimes that answer is quite obvious, and sometimes it's more complicated. Context matters. We can't divorce these conversations from context, and our context is one of deep inequality. And so by foregrounding the lived experience of those most affected by climate change and inequality, as well as by showcasing successful examples of community-driven just transition projects and interventions, and also by supporting community agency in this way, we can start to shift power and be addressing inequality. And that's often where the kind of justice and the inequality work comes in just transition work. But the second is about broad-based support. For a just transition to work, it's going to need collective buy-in. And if there's one thing that community-based organizations know how to do, it's mobilize. And so they can be really key partners in building this broad-based support for the just transition. And then the third is accountability. Wherever finance flows, there need to be accountability mechanisms Who's making those financial decisions? Where is the money going? Is it being spent on what we said it was going to be spent on? And are those interventions having the kind of impact that they were supposed to have? Communities on the ground are so well placed to be our eyes and ears on the ground, to be providing those kind of checks and balances on climate finance, specifically on the kind of climate finance that's associated with JETPs. And so they also have a very key role to play there. And so building this kind of organized, capacitated ecosystem of community-based organizations enables communities to act as implementers of just transition projects, as advocates for the just transition, and as watchdogs of the way that climate finance is spent.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Justin, what's your perspective of climate just transition?
Thanks so much. I was so excited about this microphone, but apparently it's not working.
Don't.
And this is now a very tough act to follow. So just concurring with a lot of what Shanas and Lisa have said, I think maybe speaking from a philanthropic perspective, it's clear that this, whatever it is, it's contested. And I would add that that contestation probably becomes more acute or more intense the closer you get to grassroots, right? And so that's a reality. And so as Lisa said, there's this very real question of how do we center equity and justice. And what that means is, what does it look like to actually think about who bears the costs, who benefits from the transition? And I think that that's critical. We always have to ask who benefits. And how are those benefits distributed? But also, how are the costs distributed? And I think we need to have more of an honest conversation about what that means. Because I think we have very important, Lisa, you mentioned I think it was Shana's, leaving anyone behind. And I think that that's such a critical call to action. But I also think that we have to engage with the societies that we have, with the economies that we have, with the states that we have. We have a very challenging geopolitical context. We have low levels of trust in institutions, challenges with participation and consultation. And so that's a very difficult terrain in which to do something that's quite historic and quite challenging, as Lisa said, incredibly complicated and complex. But having said that, I also think, we shouldn't shy away from the challenge. And I think we can talk a lot, and we have to focus on we have these conversations around what is just, what is not just. I think what is just will be determined by those who are affected. And of course, those are going to be frontline communities who are affected by the transition or this impending shift from high carbon to low carbon economies. And of course, workers who also stand a lot to lose, especially those who are working in fossil fuel industries as well. And so for me, communities and workers will decide what is just. But that will look different place to place. That will look different context to context. And so I think it's critical, as you said, context matters. We have to engage with the context. We have to engage with the countries. I think it's critical that countries are leading this, that just transition is not this cookie-cutter approach that you take, that's been conceptualized, I think, Shana, as you said, in the global north, and we now move it around different countries in the global south. We have to engage with the context as it is. And then, I think the last point would be, we can spend a lot of time trying to figure out the perfect definition for just transition and trying to ensure that we include as many stakeholders and actors as we can. But I also think we shouldn't be constrained by that contestation. And sometimes those contradictions, to be very frank, I think we actually need to get down to work and actually start building the kinds of projects and examples of transition on the ground, because I think so much of this is about, you spoke about imagination, and I think that that's so critical. We need to reimagine, but we also need to see examples of what an alternative could be, what an alternative can look like, and that can be at a grassroots level, but also at a national level as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Justin. This complexity leads us to listen about the different perspectives. So I'm going to give the floor to Severino, but before that, I would like to ask the technical team if the video is ready, because we are going to watch a video on testimony about recycling the Avinaris. Is it ready? Yes, the video will come after you, just after you. Just after you. Yeah, okay? Technical team, is the video ready? Okay. So go ahead, Severino. Let's hear from you your perspective of just climate transition. And please give us a few examples in practice.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Amadou, for questions. My English is bad, is very, very, but I have translation. Bom,
this is good.
Primeiramente, se a gente fosse se ligar aos temas, a primeira palavra que apareceu para nós, trabalhadores de base, catadores de material reciclável, foi globalização.
So, first of all, if we are talking about teams, the first word that appeared for us, workers on the ground, grassroots workers, is globalization.
Hoje, quanto liderança da Aliança Internacional de Catadores, a gente se toca com esse termo Just Transition em 3 grandes fóruns. Nas COPs, na Assembleia da Organização do Trabalho e no Tratado Internacional de Plástico.
So, as a leader for the Global Alliance of Waste Pickers, we find this term of just transition in 3 most important forums: COPs, the ILO conferences, and the INC.
E para nós trabalhadores, além de começar a entender esses termos como Just Transition, a gente tem que trazer uma linguagem para que os nossos companheiros também compreendam que esses temas são importantes na esfera da filantropia.
So for us workers, beyond understanding these terms, we also have to find the language to explain for our companions, our partners on the ground what they mean, and also for philanthropy.
A gente começa toda essa discussão em 1999, onde a igreja, no caso do Brasil, começa a tentar organizar os catadores de rua, os catadores de lixão, e começa esse trabalho de filantropia com uma diferença, que aí eu vou dar o exemplo de transição justa.
So this work starts for us in 1999, where church started with philanthropic work, organizing waste pickers on the streets. And then I'll give some, and that's when the work started, and now I'm going to give some example of how this translated.
Naquela época, a gente não falava com os financiadores. Só eles, ou as grandes ONGs, é quem falava com quem tinha recurso. Os catadores, trabalhadores, eles ficavam aí só como para falar da sua vida, para dizer como é que era dentro do lixão, como é que era na rua.
So at that time, we, the waste pickers on the streets, wouldn't speak to funders, to those who had money. We would just go to tell how life on the streets were and how our work worked, but we wouldn't speak to funders.
E o melhor exemplo que eu posso transferir para vocês de transição justa, Just Transition, é a nossa participação como voz hoje em dia. Antigamente as pessoas falavam em nome dos catadores, falavam em nome desses trabalhadores do lixão, das ruas, e hoje a gente senta para negociar. A gente senta com o presidente da República, senta com o ministro, senta com o presidente das fundações, de empresas.
So the best example that I can give of a just transition is this transition, when we are sitting on the decision-making spaces to speak with funders, with the presidents of foundations, with the president of the Republic in Brazil, and other decision-makers. We're sitting on the table.
Não só no Brasil, em outros países também, já temos catadores falando diretamente com seus governantes.
Not only in Brazil, in other countries as well, we have waste pickers speaking to their governmental decision-makers.
Ou seja, para mim, transição justa é empoderamento de todo o segmento, é responsabilidade de cada um que faz parte dessa imensa cadeia que é o mundo e reconhecer o trabalho de pessoas, no caso, não posso falar por todos, mas de 40 milhões de catadores que estão aí no mundo, enquanto a gente está aqui discutindo o planeta, eles estão lá recolhendo plástico, papel, papelão e dando uma sobrevida para esse planeta tão doente e com tanto resíduo.
So for me, the Just Transition is about empowerment of the sector. It's about recognizing the work of the 400 million waste pickers that are daily on the streets, collecting waste every day to give an additional life to this planet that's so sick.
Thank you very much. As a transition, let's watch the video and get back for the second round of questions. Thank you.
El reciclador al principio de esta historia era la peor expresión de la marginalidad urbana,
Teníamos vergüenza del trabajo que hacíamos.
exponiéndose a las peores condiciones que desafían la dignidad humana.
Y un día me di cuenta que estaba yendo a estudiar descalzo y sin desayunar.
Aquí, si hay algún lugar donde nosotros como Avina podemos hacer un aporte, es con este actor.
No había ninguna discusión sobre que ellos estaban haciendo algo que necesitamos que se haga. Había que empezar a unir puntas que en ese momento no conversaban. Gobiernos mirando para otro lado y un sector privado totalmente ajeno. Los recicladores no tenían muy claro a quién hablarle.
Hasta nosotros mismos pensábamos que hablar de reciclaje era algo imposible.
Y uno se cuestiona, uno dice, yo no soy nada, yo no valgo nada.
A poquito andar nos damos cuenta del gran valor ambiental que tiene este oficio.
El legado de Avina fue haber entendido que eso solamente iba a ser posible si salíamos de las trincheras y poníamos a conversar actores con intereses muy diferentes, contrapuestos en muchos casos, y hasta que no saliera el proyecto en común, no descansar. La Actitud R es una plataforma en la que recicladores, cooperación, empresas y sociedad civil se sientan en un esquema de gobierno a pensar juntos cómo llevar a América Latina al siguiente nivel.
Ayudamos a descontaminar el mundo, a la economía del país.
Avina plays a key role, right? They bring together the partnership, they nurture it, and they push the partners to stretch further.
Thank you very much. With this, we are going to, for our second round of questions, let's go back to Dr. Shenas. Dr. Shenas, I would like to ask you, how is the climate finance ecosystem moving toward a just transition?
Again, Amadou, thank you for that question, because as I'm reflecting on it, it feels like in the last decade or so there was quite a bit of movement, and this year things just seem to have not even gone backwards, but almost stagnated considerably. And so I think more and more there is national governments are going to be asked to be part of the climate finance landscape. And this is actually based on a bit of research that was done where communities were interviewed and asked who did they think was responsible for funding the climate actions that was happening. And most, I think it was way over 60% felt that it was national government. So it was national government's responsibility to ensure that their climate actions were funded. However, what we see happening this year is the climate finance architecture is not shifting. And what has been happening is that there seems to be this huge trust gap between funders and the local communities. And often the sense is that that gap gets filled with more and more fiduciary and admin requirements. And that in itself puts a huge burden not only on the communities, but on the whole finance ecosystem itself. And I think for us, what we've seen is at the core of it is the lack of trust between those who have the money and those communities where the money is actually needed. And I just want to use an example to bring the tangibility of that. So we often in the past would get told by donors to bring community members to COP. and to showcase what's being done. And often that would cost, quite a bit, so it's X, say X dollars. And basically all you had to write in your report was this person went to COP, it was so much, and it could go through. If you ask that same donor to give that same amount of money directly to the community for them to implement what they need, the answer is always no. And on the other side, there's also that these community members, and often they are women and leaders in their community, they go back to their community and there's huge expectations because they were at COP, and actually years down the line, nothing is changing. So my sense is that all these mechanisms that they called accountability mechanisms, but my sense is strongly that it's a distrust, and so it's all these mechanisms to fill that, or it's really eroding the speed at which action on the ground can happen and where it's needed. So, and often it's the women and youth most impacted. And so sadly, I think our finance, not just the ecosystem, but the architecture itself has not evolved to keep up with the needs on the ground.
Okay. Thank you. So hearing you, there are concerns, obviously. But any hope you would like to share with us? Any hope?
No, there's always hope. Yes, otherwise we'd stop working. So there are the small shifts in that we keep pushing back to the donors. And slowly they're listening, and I think the shifts at the moment are quite incremental. And so that gives us hope. And hopefully these incremental shifts lead to transformation ultimately. It still is an uphill battle, and especially for those of us based in the South, where you're so far from all the discussions happening around what is this philanthropy strategy, what's that philanthropy strategy. And if you're not in that inner circle, you often can't influence things. But there's always hope, and it's incremental.
Thank you very much. Justine, could you please share with us examples that illustrate how philanthropic engagement has been instrumental in unlocking a just transition in climate action?
So I think, This comes to sort of this question of like what is the appropriate role for philanthropy in a just transition, and I think if we think of South Africa, we have these just energy transition partnerships now. Wherever you may sit, you might feel very differently about those, whether they're successful, whether they're not as successful as you would like. But it's for however imperfect they may be, I do think philanthropy played a very critical role in sort of helping get to that moment at a global level. I think philanthropy is playing an important role in where the real work actually starts, which is actually now. So we have these frameworks, we have these processes, we have this political momentum, but to what extent are we actually capitalizing on that? Are we actually using the moment? And so I think there's a lot that philanthropy can do, supporting research, advocacy, social movements, the kinds of work that Shanaz is talking about. But I think, there's a constellation of philanthropy. And, all the way from sort of your global endowed foundations, headquartered probably in the global north, all the way to re-granters such as yourselves that are more proximate to communities. And I think this issue of alignment and coordination has come up a lot. And we are often talking about civil society needs to get coordinated and aligned, and like, why are they not working with each other? But I do think the same question we should be asking of ourselves as philanthropy. And I do think that there are opportunities for us to align and coordinate. And yes, all of us have our own strategies, we have our own agendas, but I think there is a collective agenda around supporting just transition. There is a collective agenda around meeting the climate challenge, but also not just the climate challenge, but also the challenge of justice, of equity, etc. And so I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. I think there are opportunities, to stick with the theme of hope, I think there are a lot of opportunities in countries like South Africa, Indonesia, Brazil, elsewhere, for us to actually experiment, because we, as philanthropy, can take risks. We can experiment. We can finance and support the kinds of ideas that others are not willing to take on board. But for me, that comes to sort of the quality of our infrastructure and the extent to which we are listening to communities, because I agree, communities know what they want, and we need to find better ways to hear that. But I also think, we have this access to power as well. We have our own resources, but we're also proximate to power, to decision-making spaces, be it at a national level, be it in global spaces like the COP, as Shanaz was saying. And so for me, it's a question of then how do you use that proximity and access to power in a progressive way that can help the kinds of work that we want to see at the grassroots level.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Severino, getting back to you, please tell us, what role does funding for climate plays for the West Speakers movement?
Para a gente, a gente hoje tem uma relação com outros segmentos de trabalhadores que chama trabalhadores informais. A gente vai ter agora, na semana que vem, em Genebra, 2 semanas na Assembleia da OIT, empoderamento. Fazer com que essas pessoas que tanto precisam de financiamento, que precisam de reconhecimento, que não é inclusão, a gente está incluído no sistema econômico, mas o que muitas vezes a gente precisa é de reconhecimento, é de visibilidade. Eu lembro de uma campanha que foi feita na América Latina uma vez, falando dos heróis invisíveis. Os catadores é esse herói invisível, que às vezes está na rua, está no lixão, e as pessoas não enxergam que tem essas pessoas que estão aí por dependência econômica e que fazem um bom trabalho, né? Sorry.
Let's try. So for us, it's not only about the waste speakers, we have a relationship with other sectors of informal workers, and we will be in the next 2 weeks at the ILO conference with the sector. And what's really needed is recognition. It's not about inclusion because we are included in the economic sector, but it's about visibility. Some years ago, there was a campaign in Brazil that was called the Invisible Heroes. In Latin America. That was called the Invisible Heroes, and it's about that visibility for the work of waste speakers.
Thank you very much. Lisa, how do you determine... Sorry?
Então, o que a gente... Sorry, é que eu estou muito emocionado. Então, o que a gente espera é que tenham mais severinos, que tenham mais oportunidade para a gente poder falar em nosso nome, para que as pessoas confiem, para que as instituições que fazem investimento confiem que dá certo. Nós temos hoje mais de 70 milhões de trabalhadores informais que estão sendo aportados de alguma maneira financeiramente pela Fundação Ford, Fundação Kellogg, várias fundações que estão colocando recurso e que essas trabalhadores estão transformando a vida de outros trabalhadores em seus países e em seus continentes. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
So what we expect is that what we expect is that there are more Severinos, that there are more people that can speak in the name of the sector, and that institutions trust on us and support our work. There are various foundations that are putting funds in the sector and that are giving this possibility, including the Ford Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, and other foundations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Severino. Lisa, coming back to you, how do you determine or how do you prioritize investment in climate with justice?
Thanks, Amadou. I want to answer that by sort of picking up on Anwar Shanaz was highlighting for us about these complex and often contested questions about who gets to decide, how does philanthropy get to determine, the elephants in the room, right? And how do we? What is the process by which we are figuring out what impact looks like? Put your hands up if you've ever worked in an organization that's been having discussions about impact. Fairly universal. Right? This is something that plagues us all. We're all trying to figure it out. And maybe just to share a little bit about our journey. As our name would suggest, the Environmental Justice Fund, justice is something that matters to us. So at the beginning of our journey, when we were having those impact discussions, and we were like, okay, how are we going to achieve this justice thing? We are nothing if not ambitious. We're like, okay, so what would impact look like? And one of the things we wanted to explore is this idea of, so what about if justice is not just the outcome, but justice is process also? That we can get at justice in the way we do things, not just at where we want to arrive. And what if there was a way to, if not achieve justice, at least kind of increase the amount of justice that was going on, not just in what we chose to fund and support, but in how the decisions about what we choose to fund were made. Yesterday in the climate financing panel, there was a very interesting Mentimeter. That word cloud was fascinating. What were the two biggest words there? Capitalism and greed. So that tells us something very interesting. And perhaps, what's going on there is the recognition that as soon as we're talking about money, we're also talking about power. And we have to acknowledge that and process that and bring that into these kinds of conversations. For a long time, the decision makers and the impacted have been different groups of people. But it doesn't have to be that way. And there is now a growing global community of philanthropies that are bringing the impacted into the group of decision makers by using different forms of participatory grant-making models. And so, for us at EJF, we're a newish fund. We're 3 years into our journey. And one of the ways in which we've been exploring how to do that is that our decisions, those decisions about what impact looks like, who gets support, is made by a dedicated structure called our Grants Committee that's populated by sector experts. Some of those experts are community-based leaders who are leading the struggles in their own context, in their own communities. So we have a whole range of experts in there. Some of them are waste pickers. Some of them are experts in fisher communities in the ocean economy. Some of them come from mine-affected communities. Some of them are experts in food sovereignty and agroecology. But what really matters is that because they are rooted in local realities, they can understand the local nuances, the political realities, economic realities, social realities, cultural realities often. And so they're extremely well placed to advise us on what kind of projects and what kind of organizations have the best chance of, wait for it, impact. And so, I think there's ways and there's methodologies and there's models out there for philanthropies to explore and use. That's just one form of participatory grant making. There are thousands and thousands of different ways to explore participatory models of grant making. And I think there's a very exciting momentum globally in that direction of philanthropies exploring that kind of model. That's, if you ask me the hope, I don't know if you were going to ask me the hope question, Amadou, but I'll preempt it and say that's where the hope lies. That there are things for us to explore, that there are ways for us to start addressing these problematic power dynamics and to move from our discomfort with the greed and to be thinking about how we can start doing philanthropy in ways that shift power and address these deep inequalities that we sit with in the global south.
There are additionality. There are additionality to climate when we talk about food security, among others. What are the challenges you face in assuring this additionality? Lisa.
Yeah, I think it came up so beautifully in the last panel as well, when colleagues were talking about that energy and climate democracy is also about intersectionality. And again, sometimes the answers to these questions are simple. If we let communities lead, they give us the answers, right? Because in a community, climate doesn't fit in a nice box. Climate change isn't there when waste management issues are there, and food sovereignty issues are there, and gender justice issues are there. All of these are part of intersectional daily realities. And so if our job is to address climate impact, we have to take account of that. And if our job is to facilitate and support interventions kind of that are responding to those realities, then really we just need to provide kind of support and help to what's already happening, because otherwise we kind of get into this siloed. My philanthropy only does this. Does this kind of thematic focus, and my philanthropy only does this thematic focus. And we're an education funder, and so, climate isn't relevant to us. Whereas I think there's growing awareness that because of the complexity of the problem, it touches everything. That one of the things we know about climate is that it's an intergenerational problem, and so education funders across the world are starting to explore how climate intersects with their work, and so because of the sort of polycentric nature of the problem, we're needing to understand how these things intersect in our strategies. So it's really that in our work we need to mirror the realities on the ground, and so again, if we just kind of allow ourselves to be led and allow ourselves to mirror that, that's really where the answers lie.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So let's turn to the audience. Do we have one or two questions to the panelists before we end this panel? Any question? Yes, I have one hand here, and I am in a trouble. I have two hands. No, 4 hands. Please, just 2 questions. Okay, so here and there. You first. Go ahead. At the bottom. Yeah. Do you need a mic? Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Ewens. I'm from All Rise Attorneys in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. We are non-profit lawyers working for community-based organizations. And we've been working in this field for over 10 years. And honestly, I'm feeling like I'm in a bit of a parallel universe, because as wonderful and inspiring as this forum is, I feel like the work that we're doing is so removed. We are literally fighting open cast coal mining applications all the time. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds are being submitted to the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy every year and processed. We alone are fighting about 14 around the Shihlui-Umfolozi Game Reserve in KwaZulu-Natal. And there is absolutely no indication of any kind of climate considerations whatsoever. So in the earlier panel, listening to what the cities are doing and the municipalities are doing and how we're going to engage with the people, and this is what we need to do, there's no evidence in the work that we've been doing. And there hasn't been, and it's not something that's improving. In my opinion, it's actually getting worse. So I guess what I'm trying to say is how do I go from this situation to this situation? It honestly feels like I'm in 2 separate universes, and it would be interesting to know if anyone has thought about that and how we get it right, because it's feeling very inspiring here, but at the same time extremely frustrating, because it's not translating to where we are at all. Thank you. Sorry, no hope
Who
in
want
that
to take
one.
this? Who want to react on that? Dr. Shanas? Go ahead.
I'll start, but I'm looking to my colleagues to add. So I absolutely agree with that, because I often feel we all in an echo chamber, and that we need to start stepping out of that and engaging in spaces where we don't normally engage. And I often think, because we talk about infrastructure, we talk about mining, we talk about water. How many engineers are here in this conversation? Because that's where those decisions are being made, and they're not in those conversations. And often the financiers who are going to finance that are also not in these conversations. So I don't have a solution other than we need to start moving out of our echo chambers. But I absolutely agree with, and we also see it with what you're seeing.
Yeah. For the sake of time, let's move very quickly to the second question.
Sure. Hi, Jocelyn Sotomadayo with the Solidarity Center. Thank you for this very interesting panel. I just want to touch on a point earlier and maybe just start by saying, for the workers we work with, we're a workers' organization, Just Transition has been a story of broken promises, because they don't necessarily see themselves or their priorities at the tables within these policies. But I want to stick with hope is the thread from this. So maybe I'll just say that one of the most striking things from these conversations the last 2 days is that, yes, while we work in silos as civil society, we are funded in silos: environmental, climate, human rights, justice, labor. But our realities on the ground that we see through the workers that we work with show a very different reality, right? They feel these things holistically. They feel these things intersectionally. Is that a word? I don't know. They feel these things profoundly. And I think a task for us as civil society, and I would say as well as philanthropy, is like, do we understand the context, right? Do we understand all the profound ways that, for instance, waste pickers are impacted by climate? And when we talk about just transition, yes, it is workers who are phasing out of fossil fuel. And it's often workers who want to see at the table at designing the transition but don't have the means. But it's broader. It's adaptation, like you said. It's agricultural workers, waste pickers working under extreme heat. It's garment workers in Cambodia that we've worked with who have been collectively bargaining because they're working under extreme heat and they need breaks. They need like 10-minute breaks to be healthy. They need water breaks. It's union workers in the Maldives whose hotels are flooding where they work, so they have no wages. It's all these profound ways, up and down, indirect and indirect supply chains that we do not see. So my appeal maybe for us in the room, and my appeal also as civil society, is to break out of these silos, to try to understand the context, and to really look around the room when these decisions are being made. And who is excluded? One is who is not in the room, and are we really understanding all the different ways that this affects us? Maybe one more plea to philanthropy is climate solutions need movement building. They need power. And so invest in that. And I will say labor knows power in movement building as well. But we also are hoping to break out and build these ecosystems because we need a counterweight, not only to the authoritarian rise, but to meet this challenge as it demands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's rather a comment, a contribution. That is great. So before we end up, I just would like to share with you these few reflections as a wrap-up. I'm very confident that from the different high-value and rich interventions, you have been inspired. You have been inspired about funding climate solutions that are just inclusive and locally led, drawing from innovative models and lived experience from the global south. And to add to that, creation of a movement is a demand that has been right now. So together, let's hand in hand, in a collaborative spirit, try to challenge this issue of financing climate solutions that are really, let's say, that are really responding to a demand that has been demonstrated here in this audience. This having been said, thank you very much for hearing us. Thank you to our panelists, and let me ask you to give them a round of applause. So before we end this session, I would like to invite Paula. Paula, do you have something to share with us?
Yes, it's very short. It's connecting the conversations that we are having these days here to the bigger conversation around climate governance in multilateral spaces and COP30 that's around the corner. I know, as a Brazilian, I know that Belém is far away. The logistics are very complex. So I just wanted to quickly make a question to the room. It's like, whom in the room is including reflections on how to engage with global climate governance, especially COP30 this year? Like, if we can give a hand. So yeah, it's, I would say, 1/3 of the room, a bit less, maybe. And as a Brazilian, I have to say that I found that maybe there's the distance, the logistical questions, even some of the terms that we are using for calling for global action for climate this year are not helping for the global movement. But I think I just wanted to highlight how important it is in this just transition that we, from a polycentric approach, care for maintaining a global climate governance ongoing that is being transformed towards polycentric and more decentralized ways of engagement. But it's vital and critical that we really show action and implementation to maintain the relevance of climate in the global agenda. So with that, and we had asked someone from the COP30 presidency that was here last year with us, Alice, to send a video, but due to the time differences, we didn't get it yet. But still, we wanted to show a 1-minute video that was released yesterday by the presidency of COP30 that translates the term mutirão, which some of you may have heard or not. The letter of the COP30 presidency calls the world to engage in a global mutirão for climate action. But what does this mean? Mutirão means collective action for a common task. And they released a video that translates it into different languages. And I thought that was a nice way for us to close into this collective action together with this call from the presidency.
Mutirão se parece mucho a una palabra que utilizamos en español, primero en la región andina, que se llama minga, pero que viene de la palabra quechua minca. Y minca significa trabajo colectivo comunitario, pero que es por el bien de la comunidad.
For me, coming from Burkina Faso, a traditional leader, the mutirão in my mother tongue, I can make the parallel with the Burkindi. Burkindi means you need to put integrity, humanism, humility, and altruism on all your behaviors that you're doing, whether it's in business or in your personal life. Because we are all in the ecosystem, we are interconnected and we interdependent on each other.
No tendría una traducción exacta, pero me hace pensar el mutirão en mis intercambios con comunidades indígenas en Colombia, en donde se convoca un círculo de palabra, en donde se invoca a...
Okay, so internet is challenging us, but you can see that at the COP presidency Instagram from yesterday to today, and I think that's the spirit. So even if we're not going to Belém physically, it's extremely important to engage in the global movement for climate action. So
thank you very much, Paula. Dear panelists, thank you very much. Obrigado, Severino. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Dr. Shanaz. Please.
All right, thank you, colleagues, and thank you to Amadou for that excellent session. We are now going to move into our side events, so I'm just going to give us some context on that. So for our two side events, we have Women in Energy Connect, who are doing a side event on just a transition. That's going to be here in the Protea room. And the second side event is by the Clean Energy Fund, Collaborating for Clean Air, Equity, Climate and Health Outcomes, which is in the Stelizia room next door. So we'll be having that now until 1 o'clock. And then like yesterday, we'll be having lunch, which is in Moyo, which many of you should know where that is. And then we will be back here at 25 minutes past 2 to take up our program again. Just a few housekeeping announcements. So for the bingo box, you'll see at the registration desk there in front of the Strelitzia room, there's a yellow box that says bingo box. So you can drop your bingo card in there, and then we'll be doing the draw for that at 4 o'clock or just after the coffee break. And we have a nice prize for whoever wins that. The second thing is that we have found a phone. We know that philanthropies are generous people, but we don't want your phone. So if you can come just to us here in the staff room and just tell me what's on the screen, we can, give you your phone back. And the last one is there is another session, meeting in a smaller room called the Baobab room, which is for all those who were invited to the G20 meeting. It's a very small room, so it's only by invitation. So for those of you who have been invited, you will know it's there by the information desk at the front, just there to the right, if you're facing the road, to the right. So please make your way there now, because it will happen in parallel to the other two small sessions. And then we hope that you enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you back here at 25 minutes past 2.
Hello? Hi. Should I just start? Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to... Hi. Hello. Thank you so much for your attention and for joining us at the side event on gender and climate. The title of our event is it a just transition or just the transition? And we are looking at gender equity, systematic connects, and a call for greater coordinated climate action across sectors. And I'm just going to get my presentation here on the phone, excuse me. So this event is structured around a piece of work that we facilitated last year in partnership with Democracy Works Foundation, Inspire, and KD Strategies. And the name of the report looks at engagement and coordination between the private sector, public sector, namely local governments, and civil society to support community-driven climate action. We've got a few keynote speakers, namely Manasita Omar. She will be talking to us about systematic blind spots in the just energy transition. We've also got Kate Landon, who will be addressing us about global philanthropy and policy directives. Kalnisha Singh from KD Strategies, who you also heard yesterday, will be talking us through some of the policy briefs that kind of allow us to improve levels of engagement and coordination around climate action between the three stakeholder groups. And then my name is Mira Dutschke. I'm the executive director of Kohama, which is a consultancy company that looks at work in the climate and development nexus and around building narratives and really reclaiming the African climate narrative. So it's my absolute pleasure to invite our first guest speaker, Mana, who you also saw as a keynote speaker. I'm going to read your bio out, if that's okay. Mana is an award-winning Indigenous climate and gender justice activist, advocate, and the founder and executive director of Spring of the Arid and Semi-Arid Lands, which is a youth-led, non-governmental organization working with pastoralist communities to advance climate justice. She's a global citizen scholar with the Ban Ki-moon Center and serves on several committees championing the inclusion of Indigenous voices. Mana has contributed to critical dialogues on climate resilience, adaptation, and justice and Indigenous leadership. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Thank you so much, Mira. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my name is Mana Omar, and as she had mentioned, I come from an Indigenous pastoral community back in Kenya, where the climate crisis to us is not just a concept, but a daily reality. So I'm very deeply honored to speak again today, this time about justice and how it must look like if we are truly serious about a just transition. So before we go any further, let me share where my lens was shaped. So I grew up watching my mother work for hours to fetch water while raising us as her children, tending to livestock and keeping our family afloat through one drought after another. I saw women working the hardest, yet owning the least. I saw elders read the skies to predict the rains and cry when the seasons stopped listening. So as a child, I learned resilience not from the books, but from the women around me who carried entire communities on their backs. But I also learned what injustice looks like when it's normalized, when girls are pulled from school to help at home, when women aren't allowed in meetings that decide their futures, and when climate aid arrives in trucks but leaves behind those who need it most. That's why I do this work, because if a just transition doesn't reach the girl I once was, then it isn't justice at all. So when we say just transition, who is it just for? Because when gender is treated as an afterthought, what we are doing is not just transition, it's just a transition. And it's not working for those at the margins. Gender is a power lens, it's not a box to tick. It isn't a side issue, it's a lens, one that reveals where power sits, who owns land, who decides how climate funds are used, who receives clean energy or climate-smart tech first, who shoulders the invisible labor of surviving crisis after crisis. So globally, women own less than 20% of the world's land. And in my community, most land is traditionally owned by men. But through my organization, Women Land Restoration Projects, we've seen how reviving degraded land under women's leadership not only restores the environment, it rebalances the power within families and communities. In our political systems, who has a seat at the table? Justice begins in governance. But how can we talk about fair transitions when decision-making spaces, from climate negotiations to local councils, exclude the voices of women, especially those from indigenous, rural, or frontline communities? At COP29, I was one of the only indigenous pastoralist women speaking on climate justice. Most of our delegation was self-funded, not present at all. Without access, our stories and our solutions remain unheard. So embedding gender in political system means more than just inclusion. It means redistribution of power, where women must not only be heard, they must be trusted to lead. In our economic system, who gets funded? We know that less than 1% of global climate finance reaches grassroots women organizations. Meanwhile, it is these same women who are adapting in real time, growing food with no water, restoring degraded lands, keeping families afloat. The economy rewards those at the top, while those doing the hardest unpaid work, that is, women, are left behind. This is not just a funding gap, it's a justice gap. In our technical system, many climate solutions are called technical, but they are not neutral. Who designs them? Who gets trained to use them? Who has access? So again, I'll use an example from my own work where we've introduced solar systems where initially male technicians used to dominate the training. So we intervened and ensured women were trained as well to be solar ambassadors. And today, some of these women are earning an income from maintaining solar units and mentoring others. We don't need just green tech. We need just tech. And my final call will be, we cannot fix political injustice with technical tools alone. We cannot address economic inequality without gender awareness. We need systems that listen to the lived realities of women, that fund them, that follow their leadership. Let's stop asking whether gender matters. Let's ask instead, how can justice exist without it? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mana, for giving us such a sober insight on the impact of the kind of coordination gaps and how that feels on the ground. I would like to invite Kate Landon to the stage next. She's the Executive Director of the Ban Ki-moon Foundation. We have a slide. Kate has over 20 years of experience in nonprofit management and foundation roles, and is passionate about advancing gender, racial, and economic justice within philanthropy and for sustainable development. At the Ban Ki-moon Foundation, she serves as She works to advance sustainable development goals and the Paris Climate Agreement, and through mobilization of women and youth leaders. And she previously also acted as the executive director of the New Haven Leon Sisters Project and as a vice president of programs and institutional advancement at the New York's Women Foundation. We've asked Kate to give a reflection on a global view to juxtapose our previous contribution around advancing gender justice through philanthropy and action. Please join me in welcoming Kate to the stage.
Hi, good afternoon. I don't know if I have much to say after Mana went. Thank you, Mana, for your words. We're proud to have you as a grantee of the Ban Ki-moon Foundation. So I wanted to share a bit about the foundation and our views as it relates in particular to the Sustainable Development Goals and the topic of today's session and the role of philanthropy. So we were launched in 2022 by the former Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, after he left his post at the UN. We are one of 3 offices globally that bear his name, including us in New York, but also one in Vienna, Austria, and Seoul, Korea. And we do continue his legacy on, I think, the 2 agreements for which he's best known, which are the SDGs. I'm proudly wearing my pin, as some others in the audience. Thank you to those who are. And the Paris Climate Agreement. So from our position in New York, we do this through advocacy to mobilize financing for the intersectional issues represented in the SDGs with a focus on climate, gender justice, health, and education. Both within private philanthropy as a main target and audience, but also promoting cross-sector partnerships for financing. We also engage in leadership mobilization efforts through fellowships, trainings, and other efforts to better equip leaders who have been historically marginalized by issues such as climate change, and local and international decision-making tables with a focus on women and youth, as was shared. And we engage in grant-making, providing early-stage financial resources to local leaders, advancing community-led solutions across the SDGs. And here we're often a first funder with a focus on leaders who do not yet have registered organizations. And again, Mana is a representative of one of our Amplify Fund grantees based out of Kenya, and we have others throughout the world. So in sharing a bit about why this topic is important to us in the mission of the Foundation, I wanted to reflect a bit how it relates to our growing work with Indigenous peoples and what we see as the role of philanthropy in these efforts. As the Foundation that represents Ban Ki-moon, we get invited to a lot of conversations around the SDGs, both in New York and in other global spaces, talking about how we are doing globally and regionally against the nearly 200 targets and indicators within the 17 goals. And we started seeing the data coming out around 2022 about how off track we are. With less than, does anybody know the stat? What percentage of SDG targets and indicators we are on track to achieve by 2030? Say it loud. 17. Somebody has read the report. Good job. Yes, less than 20% is what we say. It still hovers around that 15 to 20% mark every year. We know that there has been some overall progress on things related to poverty reduction, child mortality, and access to electricity. These are global trends in the right direction. Yet in other areas, we are sorely behind and even regressing to points behind the baseline originally set in 2015. These include ending hunger, climate action, decent work and economic growth, and, interestingly, freedom of the press and access to information. And this is both in the global south and the global north. So in these conversations we often get invited to, there's been a lot of consistent summarizing around the question of what went wrong and asking how we went off track. And most of the mainstream answers we've been hearing pointed to a couple of common things like the COVID-19 pandemic as to what got us off track, the unexpected conflict between Ukraine and Russia, or the sudden and dramatic increase in climate-related disasters such as floods and droughts, basically claiming that these were all externalities that we couldn't have predicted. And we know that these things had something to do with it, but it was also clear that these were incomplete, and at worst, they were false answers. So I live in New York City, just as a point of reference, the Bronx to be exact, which was one of the epicenters of the COVID-19 pandemic in its early days. And perhaps we in New York couldn't have predicted the pandemic exactly as it unfolded. But of course, as the richest country in the world, we could have been better prepared to address it when it arrived at our borders. And these communities on the front lines of the climate crisis, like indigenous peoples, have been warning and raising the alarms about the effects of climate change on their communities for decades, droughts, floods, etc. But mainstream institutions were choosing not to listen. So we knew we had to reframe the narrative at its core to show that the climate crisis is not an externality, that it's the inevitable consequence of economic, political, and social systems that do value profit over people and planet. And if you ask Ban Ki-moon, who's not here, but he's based in Korea, he travels quite frequently, what his lessons learned have been from his many years in leadership at the highest level, and you ask him, what is this number one reason for what has gone wrong in the world? He will say it is because too many leaders wake up every day with blinders on, operating with a very narrow sense of who they are in the world and to whom they are accountable, whether by nationality, identity, profession, etc. And some, he urges us to see it primarily as a matter of identity, values, and political will, not any one technocratic silver bullet that we've been missing. So we decided at the foundation we had an opportunity to, again, reframe the narrative at the highest level, not just to fast-track progress towards the 2030 agenda, but also get ahead of the big transformative ideas that will be required for us to get the post-2030 agenda right. And so instead of naively asking what went wrong, we've now started to ask, why did we ever think we were going to succeed in the first place? Considering the dearth of financing for this work, since we continue to see a funding gap to the tune of $1 to $3 trillion a year for the SDGs, or considering the dearth of investment in indigenous peoples as key holders of knowledge and solutions to these issues, which we know were not adequately considered in the creation of the agenda as it's currently designed. And so these questions is what led us to expand our work with indigenous peoples last year with the goals of expanding the numbers and also overall influence of indigenous leaders in global decision-making spaces as rights holders, not just as stakeholders. For example, pushing for indigenous principles for a just transition that incorporates UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as FPIC, free and prior informed consent, on issues such as mining, as has been discussed at the conference. Also, reducing systemic barriers to meaningful participation in these spaces. So as was mentioned on the last panel, it's not enough to just provide funding to attend these spaces if not enough people, once they arrive, have meaningful mechanisms to both engage, but also bring that knowledge back to their local communities or nor funding to implement that work. And we're also promoting, within private philanthropy, funding for indigenous-led efforts in ways that align with their own self-determination. For example, we know that for most indigenous communities, these concepts of colonial borders just don't make sense, yet private funders continue to have very siloed regional focuses that prevent investment in cross-border collaboration. And so we've been really analyzing how we can put the full weight of our financial, social, and political capital behind this work, understanding where we need to lead, where we need to follow, and sometimes realizing that moving the money feels easy, and it's the moving of the social and political capital that feels the trickiest. But it is exactly in these complications that we know we are doing the right thing, because it means that we are, in fact, shifting power in those uncomfortable moments. And we encourage other funders to do the same, to think outside the box and focus their efforts less on technocratic silver bullets and more on supporting efforts that intentionally redefine these basic concepts and norms of risk, of leadership, of power, and accountability. For example, what would it mean to fund indigenous peoples and other local civil society actors to be and not just do? What if we released an RFP asking NGOs, if you were the best version of yourself in your full power and in the best relationship possible to others in your community at this time, what would that look like? And fund that. So building upon a quote that was shared yesterday, that persons are persons through our relationships to other persons, which I will definitely take with me back to New York. I think we need some of that there. I would also offer to funders that funders are funders because we have good work to fund. And as such, our primary goal should be ensuring that the field is strong overall, regardless of the professional hat that we may wear in any one moment in time, which does change over time, and that we are worthy of funding it, even before we get obsessed with getting our own foundation's theory of change right. So I'm looking forward to hearing the recommendations that come out of this report today, as well as your feedback, because we know we wanted this session to be interactive. And I commit to taking these recommendations back with me to New York and into our ongoing advocacy agendas. So thank you, and I will now turn it back over to Kalnisha.
Okay, thank you so much, Kate, for that, for those insights. I think what sticks with me is that oftentimes we start talking about climate change in response to disasters, but the just transition really requires us to think differently about it. It's not just about responding to disasters, but it's also facilitating people, especially women and youth, to take advantages of some of the opportunities that climate change actually brings, especially in the global south. I just want to give very brief background to the report. It was work done by Democracy Works Foundation, Inspire, and KD Strategies, as I had mentioned. And it was part of a project called Fostering Inclusive Growth Through Climate Change Champions, where we worked to increase the participation of non-climate or environmental organizations in decision-making spaces, and especially resource allocation spaces in local government and the private sector, especially independent power producers. I would like to introduce Kalnisha Singh. She's a development economist and kind of did the bulk of the work for this report. She's a strategic industrial and economic transformation specialist. She started her career out in industrial and economic efficiency, advising on policy and incentive design and implementing industrial development. But her current focus is on impact transformation and sustainability in the financial, mining, and renewable energy sectors. She's passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and her particular interest lies with the African identity concepts, intrinsic bias, gender mainstreaming, and Afrocentric economic models. I would like, as we are listening to Kalnisha's recommendations that come out of this report, I would like you to reflect if and how any of these insights reflect in your own work. We would like to have a quick session to also hear from you what your experience are and if any of this stuff resonates with you and how. And with that, please join me in welcoming Kalnisha to the stage.
Hi, everyone. I always feel very, very awkward when I have these grand introductions because I never know what to do with myself. But let's talk about the work. What's really interesting is, and I know that everybody's like really keen to hear recommendations, but I'll share some reflections first. When we were conducting this work, and it happened over a period of 6 to 8 months, and sort of built on previous work that we had done at a very hyper-local level, engaging communities and understanding systematic responses to sort of climate change, influenced disasters, and changing weather patterns at a hyperlocal level. And the one recurring message that we got at a very, very hyperlocal community level is, how are we expected to curtail our dreams as a result of actions that were taken somewhere else? And how did that play out, right? When I was growing up, I grew up in a rather impoverished community. My grandparents were subsistence farmers, and I'm the first person in my family to have received an education, a good education. And there was lots of sort of expectations on my shoulders and on the shoulders of my siblings because we got access to that opportunity. But one of the key messages we got as we were growing up was that your ticket to economic activity, your ticket out of here, is a driver's license. And then we all started dreaming about the cars that we would drive. And when I was growing up, and I'll give away my age, my dream car was a late 90s model
BMW 3 Series, right? Everybody knows what that looks like, right? And kids growing up in these really marginalized, removed from economic access communities all dream about getting their driver's license and driving a car. The current car du jour, as I'm sure everybody knows, is a VW GTI, right? That's what the kids want to drive. That's the ticket out of here. And how do we convince kids, right, just like the rest of us, to curtail their dreams and their ambitions for the sake of climate action, that they had no part in creating this crisis that we're in? What do we replace that dream with? And we don't have any solutions to that question. What do I replace my dream with? And that's just the fundamental reality of the misunderstanding, the misalignment when we are engaging on conversations around climate action at a hyper-local level in the emerging markets, where majority of the people across the global south have never been able to participate in mainstream economic activity, the stuff that we call formal economics, right? It's just the reality. And we haven't yet come to a point where we can offer responses to those questions at a local level. And it's far easier then for us to talk about, okay, let's look at clean cooking because of whatever, because, we can't answer the dreams. And that's just a reflection. And as we proceed in the conversations around a just transition, I think that's the first recommendation, is we need to think about how do we interpret justice for the people that will be most affected by the transition. Because again, the reality is, in the South African context, in the African context, is that the transition will come at a cost to us, right? In South Africa, it's estimated that there's 250 years worth of coal left in the ground, 250 years worth of potential economic activity that we'll probably not realize as a result of the just transition. At the same time, the minerals required, the platinum group metals, the critical minerals that are now being explored for inputs into battery technology and renewable energy technology, all of that exists under the ground here. So communities will be affected, communities will be relocated, water sources will be tapped to engage in that mining extractive activity. And so the effect will happen. The economic impacts of that action will happen. So how do we then communicate justice to those communities who will be physically impacted by the activity that enables a transition for the rest of the world? Right? And those are the real questions that are not being answered. We're not speaking the same language. And that's the sort of bottom line recommendation, is that as much as I get confused by all of the sort of climate narrative around mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and building all of these sort of fantastic and supernormal concepts, we are also not interpreting the actions to make sense or be relevant in the hyper-local setting when people are feeling the crux of the impact of the changing weather patterns and the changing climate every day today. Right. AI-generated image. The other sort of core recommendation that came out of our studies and as a result of other work was that there's this general misalignment between what is considered developmental in our context and what is considered climate action in our context. And those of us that are working in this space are trying to now advocate for the overlaps between what is development and what is climate action. And we can't have development that is at the cost of the environment, but at the same time, it's difficult to articulate in these spaces where climate action looks very much like people behind computers, right? And that's where the funding is being channeled to. And there's lots of research and strategy being designed. And whereas the impacts are being felt by the people every day on the ground. So we have policymakers that design beautiful policies. We have researchers that do beautiful research. But the result of those policies and research is not being manifest into actions, which is, I think, a global challenge that we all have everywhere. But it's materializing in the most extreme cases, in our case in South Africa, where as a result of the lack of action, we have this growing discontent with anything that is related to climate action, with anything that's related to a just transition, and it's spewing into political circles, as we heard yesterday with our recent election results. And the last thing, which is something that's subtly dealt with and has been dealt with across these last 2 days, is the sort of misalignment of power and the power dynamics at play in engagement. And we find, particularly if we take a gendered perspective, how the power dynamics play out in engagement at a community level, but also between the private sector, the public sector, and at the intersection of community. And we all know, I mean, we're supposed to be focusing on gender in this conversation. We all know that current economic models were not designed to include women. And it's something that we've been fighting since the dawn of feminism, right? Or even before then, suffragettes. And everybody's still surprised when I say something like that. The current economic models were not designed to include women. The example I always offer is if you've gone to a public event, right, go to the movies or to the theater, and at the intermission, go to the toilet. There's always a queue outside the female toilet. Why is there always a queue outside the female toilet? It's because buildings are not designed to consider the demand of women. If they were, there wouldn't be a queue. So, what does that mean? It means that by taking sort of copy-paste strategies to policy design, to infrastructure design, we are systematically failing to include women in the design of concepts at every level of the economy, at every level of society. And that's also the case in kind of everything around climate action, particularly in the global south, right? Because not only are we failing to include women at the policy-making tables, we are also failing to consider the impact on women as a result of the climate change that is happening right now as we speak. And the reality also, I mean, I think we all know, just from the sort of demographic in the room, we all know that it's women in these local communities that have the biggest burden, right? They have the societal burden of having to take care of the next generation and feed their families. But more than that, right? In an African context, women have the societal burden of taking care of each other and holding whole communities together. At the same time, we are facing the power dynamics at play where women are not represented in political structures. Women are not represented in sort of community-led structures, even though they are the custodians of the land and the children and the future, and the healthcare in most cases. And the systematic exclusion from engagements, right? The systematic exclusion from engagements means that we are failing to consider those very, very direct impacts of climate change in those local communities, in the policy making, in the action design, and in the systems. The good news is, as women do, she always makes a plan. So what we're seeing is that the climate action that is being undertaken on a daily basis, that's ensuring that communities survive and thrive, despite everything that's going on, is as a result of women-led initiatives at a grassroots level. And that's always the good news. And that's it for me. Reflections and recommendations is fundamentally that we need to rethink the systemic design of how we include and engage local communities, particularly female voices, in action planning, policy making, and strategy around climate action. We also need to reconsider what we consider justice. I don't think it's enough anymore to consider what justice is at a very macro level. I think we have to consider what justice means at a very micro, hyper-local level. I think we have to get really honest about what the impacts of the just transition is going to be. There's always costs. Who's going to bear those costs? From an economic perspective, but also from a social perspective. How are we going to do things differently this time? So the just transition is reliant on extraction through mining. How is that extraction going to be undertaken in a different way so that people have a better outcome than what's happened in the past? And then ultimately, how do we ensure and secure well-being for communities that are going to be fundamentally impacted from an economic perspective by the just transition, right? People are going to lose their jobs. It's a bottom line reality that everybody that's currently employed in the coal mining value chain will lose their jobs. It's not enough to say that renewable energy is going to create jobs. It's very, very unlikely that a guy that's been digging in a coal mine for 20 years is going to be employed in the renewable energy value chain. But what are we going to do to ensure that his well-being and his family's well-being is sustained as we transition? And that's it.
Thank you so much, Kalnisha, for those insights that are based on the research and the report. I would like to invite you for the next 5 minutes to perhaps turn to the person next to you or whoever you want to speak with to reflect if any of the things that were said here today actually resonate with your work. We're going to do that for 5 minutes, and we have another 10 minutes for questions and answers for our presenters. Please go ahead. Have a chat with each other. Okay. Hi, everyone. We are almost... I need like a ding, ding, ding. It's so lovely to see everyone engaging. If I can just ask you to bring the conversation to a close. We're about 10 minutes away from lunch when we can hopefully continue this vibrant discussion. I would like to invite some feedback, perhaps from the discussions that you've had amongst each other, or if you have questions or comments to our presenters. Now is the time, but also we can also continue the conversation at lunch. Please come and find us if you want to talk about anything. But we've got another 5 minutes left, so it'd be wonderful to hear from you what your thoughts were. I'm not quite sure how we manage it with the microphones, but I see a hand over there and over here. Please shout at me if I haven't gotten the right order. Over there. And here.
Help me for translation. Good morning, everyone. I am Letícia Leubert from Galadas, from Black Women Institute from Brazil. I don't speak English, so my friend can help me. I speak in Portuguese. Achei muito interessante. Primeiro, muito obrigada pela contribuição das painelistas. Vai me sinalizando quando for. Achei muito importante a gente ter uma discussão sobre ODS junto com a perspectiva de soluções climáticas.
Well, thank you for all the panelists. She thinks it was very interesting to have the debate integrating the SDGs and the climate solutions.
Com todo esse enfraquecimento do multilateralismo, a gente buscar a sinergia entre essas agendas é uma estratégia potencial, ao contrário, né, de sobrepor uma agenda à outra.
Considering the weakening context of multilateralism, it's very important to seek synergies between these agendas, the SDGs agenda and also the climate agenda. Synergies, we can find potential action in those synergies.
Eu gostaria de compartilhar uma informação com esse grupo, que recentemente a minha organização liderou a criação de um stakeholder group de afrodescendentes.
She wants to share that recently in the UN system, her organization led the creation of the Afro-Descendants Stakeholder Group.
E um pequeno contexto, né? Os major groups foram criados na ECO 92 e ao longo do processo outros stakeholder groups foram criados, mas a população afrodescendente estava totalmente invisibilizada nesse processo.
Since the conference in Rio in 92, the major groups started to be created, but from that time to now, the Afro-descendants were left behind and didn't have a specific stakeholder group.
E eu faço essa menção, e especificamente nesse território, porque a minha pergunta é: como a gente articula as agendas dos grupos historicamente marginalizados? Essa é a minha pergunta.
So she's mentioned that because she wants to ask to you and hear from you, how can we integrate these global agendas with the historical marginalized groups like Afro-descendants?
E para finalizar, eu gostaria de reconhecer também a iniciativa da União Africana desse ano, que definiu como tema do ano justiça reparatória para africanos e afrodescendentes. Então, como a gente traz essas perspectivas para o centro do debate das soluções climáticas? Thank you.
Also, considering the African Union thematic for this year in terms of reparation justice, and how can we connect also this agenda of reparation? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to invite, it was you in the front here, for there was another question or comment, and then I will ask our panelists to respond.
Thank you so much for the presentations. My name is Juliet Nagamba. I work with Akina Mama Africa, and I am from Zambia. I had just a few reflections when I was listening to the presentation, especially the one on advancing gender through philanthropy and policy. Yeah, I think one of the quotes that came to mind was when spider webs unite, they can really tie down a lion. But I think my reflection also goes back to a set of principles that we developed when we, in my organization, that we use to envision how climate finance can flow to the global south. But then I was also reflecting then, how do we develop a set of principles then that can help us advance gender justice and through philanthropy and policy? Because the issues that we really deal with are not single-based issues. I think we need to look at these issues from a more broad and holistic approach and how then they intersect. Then I also had a reflection around sustainability, longevity and flexibility of especially philanthropy, but also how then can this be embedded in the policy. I think maybe the other comment is around how do we change ourselves. I think this has been a great 2 days because the discussions have really been focused on trust, transformation, and really putting aside the little bit of the financial aspect. And I think those are some of the values that we need to focus on more. How do we trust? How do we build the networks? But most importantly also maybe looking at how do we approach and measure trust, transformation, or advancing gender. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I would like to give an opportunity to our panelists to respond. Can I pass the mic?
Wow, guys, those are really big questions. I think to maybe sort of reflect on the first question a little bit, I think one of the key barriers that we find to sort of effective stakeholder engagement is around, it's around a sort of lack of honesty around the intentions or the intentionality of the engagements, right? I think that given the thematic focus of this summit being sort of trust building, I think that a key element of building trust between individuals is being truly honest about what your intentions are. And in our context in South Africa, I think a lot of the distrust that currently exists in stakeholder relationships is because of that lack of honesty around intentions. And I'll give you an example. So from a private sector perspective, community engagement or stakeholder engagement is usually driven from the perspective of risk mitigation or compliance. So there's a contractual obligation to engage with local stakeholders or a particular stakeholder group because it's contracted in some agreement somewhere, and therefore the private sector take a risk mitigation approach. Whereas from a public sector perspective, the stakeholder engagement is usually in order to further their political ambitions, right? So we'll engage with our constituents to sort of garner favor to be elected in the next set of elections. And each stakeholder in that ecosystem therefore has a very fundamentally different reason or intention for engaging. And the lack of transparency around that intentionality is what creates distrust in the system. And then it creates sort of, I want to say, aggregated prejudice or bias in the stakeholder relationships. And I think overcoming that first hurdle is the key to unlocking effective stakeholder relationships and effective stakeholder engagement, and particularly where you find groups of people that have been systemically excluded from multiple layers of conversations, so historically marginalized groups particularly, it's very, very difficult to garner trust and favor in those stakeholder groups because of the historical exclusion. So you almost need to peel back the layers and get to the root cause of why there's distrust. Again, so on the other hand, once you do that effectively, once you've peeled back the layers and addressed the root cause of the distrust, building momentum with engagements in that stakeholder group usually is a domino effect. It happens very quickly. But yeah.
Thank you for the question on the Afro-Descendant working group. I actually think we could have a whole other 3-hour workshop or session on the topic of these working groups and engagement at the UN and what's actually happening and working and all of that. And even, I know I kind of focused my remarks on indigenous peoples, and as you know, right, there's a lot of different ways to cut and analyze to what extent it makes sense to organize, the concerns and priorities of indigenous peoples with local communities, with Afro-descendant groups or not, on a variety of issues. So again, this is why I think that the conversation deserves this whole conference or topic. But certainly the cuts in UN funding on these topics is not helping right now. Even, in New York, we hosted many conversations, efforts, people in town for the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and where the UN Voluntary Fund had X amount of funding, last year to send people. Now that's been cut. And so I think some of these issues are definitely off the radar of private philanthropy in the U.S., unfortunately. And that's a big, even though literally the UN is sitting in their backyard. And they do have the resources to address some of these things and do have some ability to fill in the gaps of the funding cuts. So that's partially what we are committed to doing, is to get U.S.-based funders who've made money in the U.S. off of extractive industries that have had global with global implications, to see issues like what you're raising as their concern, even if they traditionally have not seen them as their concern. On the issue of sort of trust-based philanthropy funding, multi-year unrestricted support, which continues to be, I think, the correct clarion call for the field, I will just notice, and this is going back to my Mark's comments on the beginning of yesterday morning, which now seems like eons ago, but it was just the opening panel yesterday, where as another American in the room, he talked about feeling the need to, even though we don't vote for certain people, we have a collective sort of responsibility to figure out how to move forward. It is our collective responsibility. Also I'm also American. And the reality is, part of the reason why we are in the situation we are in the U.S. politically is that the conservative right have outfunded us, and I say us with my personal lefty hat on, in terms of the basic principles of trust-based philanthropy from decades ago. They beat us at that game decades ago. So while the left, I think, and this is why I sort of continue to push back on this concept of even logic models and strategy. As nerdy as I am, I went to NYU. I have a master's degree in social policy. I think in some ways on the left, we over-professionalized ourselves a bit on the strategy side. While they were funding large grants, multi-year, they found leaders they believed in. They didn't ask a lot of questions. They didn't ask for a lot of documentation. They haven't asked for a lot of reporting, and they've been winning, right? They've founded people they believe in their vision, they move the money, and they step back, right? And they kept their eye on a long game of 10, 20, 30 years of funding, as opposed to getting obsessed with we have to get the theory of change correct before we do anything at all. And so that's something that we need to own with my sort of social justice philanthropy hat on from the U.S. And that's sort of a message I'm bringing to other funders, to say, if we're going to get it right in another 10 to 20 years, we do have to start shifting how we behave and how we fund. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I'm also happy to talk to anybody else who wants to continue that conversation in the U.S. with me afterwards. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm aware that I'm standing between you and lunch, which I really hate doing. I do invite everyone to continue the conversation. It's a big challenge to have meaningful discussion about gender and climate in under an hour. What I think we have done is scratch the surface on many topics that we still want to explore, so it would be wonderful to continue connecting with you. Thank you so much for being here and for your participation. Please join me in a big round of applause for yourself and our panelists. And please enjoy your lunch. Thank you so much.
Jack do che motula